Yes, it's time for you to clean up the yard. Get outside pronto were the words that echoed from my mother-in-law at my in-law's house. I was always treated like a servant, especially at Christmas. After doing all sorts of housework, I'd find myself locked out in the yard. It was tough at first, but as the son's wife, I eventually accepted it. If I could endure it for a little while, I could go home. That's all I thought about, waiting for time to pass. One Christmas, thanks to my sister-in-law, I had an awakening. My name is Ariel. I'm 27 years old and I work in an office. My husband Tom is 33 years older than me. We've been married for 3 years. I'm an indoor person, preferring to relax at home on my days off. I'm not antisocial, just shy and not great with large groups. When I first met Tom, he was kind and reliable. I met him at a drinking party I attended with a friend. I thought it was a small gathering, but there were many strangers, and I wanted to go home right away. Tom was the one who helped me. I didn't know there would be so many people. Let's have a quiet drink over here, he suggested. He's a cheerful person and probably fine with crowds, but he stayed with me, chatting about various things. When it was time to move to the after party, he discreetly said, "It's better to go home now." He let me leave early. Such gatherings often exhaust me, but that day, thanks to him, I wasn't tired and actually had fun. He remained kind and reliable as we dated. As an indoor person, he took me to places I'd never seen before, showing me beautiful views. He was always gentle, escorting me wherever we went. In the 2 years we dated, we never fought. But after marriage, I saw a not-so-kind side of him. Perhaps it was inevitable. No longer just his girlfriend, but his son's wife. When he came home, "Is dinner ready? Can I take a shower?" He'd always ask. I work full-time, though I don't have overtime. Sometimes, depending on when my husband gets home, I can't get dinner or his shower ready in time. "I'll do it now. Just wait a little longer," I tell my husband, always rushing to prepare. If he realized things weren't ready, he'd let out a deep sigh and sit down on the sofa to watch TV. "Oh, beef stew again," he'd remark. I try to prepare in advance or get creative, but if it's the same menu, he gets upset, accusing me of slacking off. Even with simple dishes, my husband never helps. Instead, he leaves his socks under the sofa. He seemed like the epitome of a henpecked husband. We had never lived together before marriage, and I was taken aback by this behavior, as we hadn't experienced this when staying at each other's places. I'm not the most efficient, so while feeling guilty, I kept thinking about how to do household chores more effectively. Apart from this, he was as kind as he always had been. I always thought it was just me failing as his wife. This feeling intensified whenever we visited my in-laws' house. Their house is an hour's drive from ours. I only go a few times a year, but I get so nervous I can't sleep the night before. My father-in-law, Eric, a henpecked husband like my husband, always sits quietly in the same spot, reading the newspaper. Coffee, I'd often hear him say to Mary, my mother-in-law, as if used to it. Mary prepares the coffee even before being asked and serves it right away. I guess my husband grew up seeing Mary do this and expects the same from me. Eric, being a man of few words, shows little interest in me, barely speaking beyond greetings. Mary is a strong, talkative woman, having been a housewife for years. She efficiently does her chores, probably finding my ineptitude frustrating. When at the in-laws, I cook with Mary, but she often scolds me. "What are you waddling for? Get those vegetables chopped now." I can only reply, "I'm sorry, I'll do it right away." With each visit, I felt increasingly disliked by Mary, always being scolded no matter how careful I tried to be. I blamed myself for not improving. Even when my husband saw me scolded, he said nothing, just lounging around watching TV or fiddling with his phone. Overwhelmed by the constant scolding, I eventually talked to him about it. "You just need to be more efficient. Mom doesn't usually get that angry," he remarked. His words weren't wrong, but they only made me feel more dejected. One day, a year into our marriage, while cooking with Mary as usual, she finally snapped. "I'm so frustrated doing chores with you. I can't take it anymore. From now on, you'll do it alone. I'll just give instructions," she declared. It seemed Mary had reached her limit with me, scolding me every time. "All right, I understand. I'm sorry," was all I could say. Yet again, after apologizing, I ran to the bathroom in tears, feeling pathetic for upsetting Mary so much. I felt terrible for not being a good daughter-in-law. From then on, under Mary's orders, I did all the household chores alone when at the in-laws' house. Even though I worked by myself, Mary's scolding didn't stop. I was always apologizing. Despite my efforts, my husband and Eric just turned a blind eye. Christmas was particularly depressing. My husband has 3 siblings, and his unmarried brother would come home for the holidays. Sally, my sister-in-law, living far away, only comes back once a year and spends her time at her husband's parents' house. Every year on Christmas Eve, Mary cleans the house from top to bottom, prepares roast turkey, and gets ready for the Christmas feast. On Christmas Day, she cooks up a storm and waits for her 2 younger sons to return. The first year, having helped Mary before, now that I was doing chores alone, it meant handling everything. Just thinking about it was overwhelmingly distressing. On the way to the in-laws' house on Christmas Eve, I did the grocery shopping Mary had asked for, and the car was full. Upon arriving and finishing unloading, Mary immediately instructed me to start cleaning the windows. One cleaning task after another followed, along with preparing lunch. By evening, I was exhausted, yet the cleaning wasn't done. "What are you dawdling for? At this rate, we'll have to continue tomorrow." Mary kept scolding me. I was too tired even to apologize. When I finally finished cleaning, it was already dark outside. Then, I started preparing the roast turkey and cleaning up, and before I knew it, it was the next day. I hadn't even started preparing for tomorrow's meal. Sally hadn't instructed me on the preparations. "It needs to be ready by 11 o'clock a.m., she said before heading to bed. My husband and Eric had already fallen asleep. I spent the night desperately doing the meal prep. There was so much to do, and as I worked, I couldn't help but cry. Sally probably started cleaning and prepping not just on Christmas Eve, but several days before. It was unreasonable to expect me to do it all alone. I understood that, as a son's wife, I had to accept this, but I couldn't stop crying. Eventually, morning came while I was still prepping, and I had to start cooking right away to be ready by 11 o'clock a.m. I finished everything in time, feeling relieved that I managed to get it all done by 11 o'clock a.m. "Wow, this looks delicious." "Thanks, Mom," exclaimed the brothers. Their words irked me. Just as I thought I could finally sit down to eat, Mary called me. "What are you sitting down for? It's family time now. You need to clean the yard," Mary said, handing me a broom. I couldn't believe it but had no energy to resist. Silently, I took the broom and went to the yard. From inside the house, I could hear my family chatting and laughing, seemingly uncaring of my absence. The in-laws' house is in the north, and it was freezing that day. I didn't even have time to put on my coat, so I shivered uncontrollably as I tried to clean. Tears and a runny nose wouldn't stop. I kept telling myself it was my duty as a son's wife, just waiting for the time to pass. 3 hours passed before I was allowed back inside. I was so cold I could barely move, but Mary immediately said, "Hurry up with the cleaning." Shivering, I did the dishes. I knew I could go home soon, as my husband had to work from the second day. That thought kept me going. By the time I finished, it was time to leave. I was exhausted, having not slept since the day before. In the car on the way back, I cheerfully told my husband, "Am I going to spend every Christmas like this? I'm tired, cold, and I can't take it anymore. Just be more efficient, and you can sleep next year. Stick on lots of disposable heating pads. Stop crying. It's bad luck for Christmas." His cold response angered me. I was starting to resent him. No, I think I already disliked him. I had time off until the 3rd, but I got sick from being outside in the cold and spent the rest of my Christmas break in bed. This treatment continued every time I went to the in-laws' house. The next Christmas Eve, I tried to prepare in advance and get more sleep. I even brought lots of disposable heating pads in case I had to go outside. But Mary criticized my pre-made dishes. "This is too salty. Start over," she said, rendering my efforts meaningless. Then she took all the heating pads from my bag. "Oh, disposable heating pads. These will be perfect for church." "Thank you," she said, taking them all. I couldn't sleep again because of the cleaning and cooking. After preparing the meal, I was sent outside to avoid catching the cold again. I wore a down jacket and took the disposable heating pads I had put in my pockets outside. Despite wearing thick clothes and carrying the heating pads, I couldn't stop shivering as it was snowing that day. About an hour later, a little boy came out of the house. "Wow, snow," he exclaimed. I was surprised. There shouldn't be any children inside. "Henry, put on your gloves," Mary called out. It turned out Sally had arrived unbeknownst to me while I was outside. Sally and her child had come to the in-laws' house. Apparently, she had a fight with her husband and didn't go to his parents' house this year. It was the first time I'd seen her since our wedding 3 years ago. When Sally saw me, she was surprised. "Is that you, Ariel?" she greeted. "Hello, Sally. It's been a while," I greeted her, still shivering. Concerned about me trembling, Sally gave me some disposable heating pads from her pocket. "Goodness, you're shivering. Why are you outside all this time?" she asked, warming my hands. "I was asked to clean the yard as the son's wife," I explained. I answered, and Sally, looking angry, said, "What? What do you mean? Come inside, and you too, Henry." She ushered me into the house. Sally approached my husband and the others who were chatting. "Hey, what's this about?" Ariel was shivering. "What if something had happened?" she asked forcefully. "Mom just asked her to clean the yard," my husband replied nonchalantly. "Tom, you don't see anything wrong with this. And Mom, what's this about?" Sally confronted my husband and her mother. Eric pretended not to know, and the two brothers-in-law looked uncomfortable. A son's wife should do what's expected of her. "I just had her do her duties," Sally's mother replied sulkily. "There's no such thing as a son's wife's duties in this world. How can you, a former daughter-in-law, not understand? You don't even realize how horrible this is. This is awful. I will never forgive you, and not just you, everyone here," Sally said, and left the in-laws' house with her child. I stayed at a nearby hotel. While soaking in the pool, I told her everything. Sally, too, had been harshly treated by her mother-in-law and listened to me with tears. "Ariel, you've been treated like a slave, haven't you? It's been tough. You don't have to endure it anymore. You can be free," she hugged me. I had always thought it was inevitable as a son's wife and endured many hardships, but finally, I realized it was abnormal. Feeling liberated, I also cried. Spending time with Sally, I felt the need to become stronger. After getting out of the pool, we ate the delicious hotel food, and exhausted from not sleeping since Christmas Eve, I fell asleep without realizing it. The next morning, I saw missed calls from my husband but ignored them, choosing to explore the area around the hotel with Sally and her child. Throughout this, my husband and Mary kept calling. "Ariel, it's okay to ignore him," Sally advised, so I didn't answer the phone and enjoyed sightseeing instead. Later that evening, when Sally said she was going home, I drove her to the station. As we said goodbye, "Ariel, I've done enough payback for you. The rest is up to you," she told me. I didn't fully understand. "Thank you for everything." I thanked her deeply and went home. When I got home, my husband was there, demanding, "Hey, where have you been? I called you so many times." Ignoring his frantic concern, he continued, "The house has been sold. It's my sister's doing." Confused, I asked, "What? Sally?" "Sally has married the heir of a national real estate company. Our house and the in-laws' house were bought through Sally's husband's company. The two brothers-in-law rented through the same company," he explained. "Sally, unable to forgive what happened yesterday, have listed our house and the in-laws' house for sale and filed eviction notices for the brothers' rentals. Within a month, the entire family had to move out, losing their home." I laughed at Sally's extraordinary actions, touched that she did all this for me. "You know about this, right? Tell my sister to stop. She'll listen to you," my husband pressed. Laughing, I responded, "I'll talk to Mom." He called Mary. It was hard to hear, but she sounded angry. "It's called personal responsibility. I'm leaving this house too, so it doesn't matter to me if there's no house. The family can live happily outside, right? Like in a tent? It might be cold and shivering." I teased while saying this to my husband and Mary on the phone. "What are you talking about?" my husband exclaimed. "The joke's on me. I'll send you the divorce papers," I said, packed, and went to my parents' house. I called Sally on the way to tell her I was divorcing. "Way to go, Ariel. I knew you'd make that choice. Let's go to a hotel with a pool again," she said cheerfully. I'm grateful to Sally. If she hadn't come that day, I would have endured terrible treatment for decades. Later, we officially got divorced. My ex-husband's family lost their homes. We used to split living expenses and manage our own savings, which I didn't know, but apparently he had hardly any. He had to borrow money for a new house. He was blamed by the in-laws and borrowed more for their initial costs. After the divorce, his debts grew, and he started working part-time at night. Serves him right. The in-laws had lived in a spacious house thanks to Sally, but now had to settle for a small apartment. Embarrassed, Sally rarely leaves the house, living quietly. I started living at my parents' house. When I helped with chores, Mom was surprised at my efficiency. I thought I was clumsy and hadn't grown, but I was wrong. I became skilled in household chores during my 3-year marriage. Sally and I still keep in touch and occasionally visit hotels with pools. Talking to her gives me strength. Becoming the strong woman like Sally is my goal.
My name is Julia, and I never imagined my life would turn out like this. I grew up in a pretty normal family, well, normal for us anyway. My dad was always busy with his window frame business, and my mom took care of the house. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Dad rarely talked about work at home. He'd come in late, give Mom a quick kiss, and ask me how school was. That was about it. I didn't mind though. I was happy in my own little world. I remember the day everything changed. I was 22, fresh out of college and trying to figure out what to do with my life. I overheard Dad on the phone, his voice tense. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you take over my company. I've worked too hard for this," he said. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but I couldn't help it. My stomach twisted as I listened. Dad's company was in trouble? Why hadn't he said anything? That night at dinner, I watched him closely. He seemed normal, joking with Mom about her overcooked pot roast. But I saw the worry lines around his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. I had to do something. But what? I didn't know the first thing about business. Still, I couldn't just sit back and watch my family's livelihood get destroyed. The next day, I did some digging. It wasn't hard to find out who was trying to take over Dad's company. Big shot businessman named Robert Caldwell. His office wasn't far from our house. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy when I asked to see Mr. Caldwell. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, eyebrow raised. "No, but it's important. Please, just 5 minutes," I begged. She must have taken pity on me, because after a phone call, she waved me towards the elevator. "Top floor," she said. The ride up felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, I was face to face with Robert Caldwell himself. He was older than I expected, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. Well, he said, looking me up and down. "What do we have here?" I swallowed hard. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Julia Thompson. I'm here about my father's company, Thompson Windows." His eyebrows shot up. "Thompson's daughter? This is unexpected. Come in, let's talk." I followed him into his office, trying not to gape at the view. He settled behind his massive desk and gestured for me to sit. "So, Miss Thompson, what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "Please don't take over my father's company. It means everything to him. There must be another way." Caldwell leaned back, studying me. "Interesting. I have a proposition for you, Miss Thompson. I'll leave your father's company alone, if you agree to marry my son." I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Marry my son, make him grow up a little. Do that, and your father's company is safe." I left Caldwell's office in a daze. Marry his son? Was he insane? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have much choice. It was either this, or watch my father's life's work crumble. The next day, I found myself back in that intimidating office. Caldwell was waiting, a smug smile on his face. "So, Miss Thompson, have you made your decision?" I took a deep breath. "Yes. I'll do it. I'll marry your son." Caldwell clapped his hands together. "Excellent. Let's introduce you two, shall we?" Before I knew it, I was being ushered into another room. And there he was, Caldwell's son. I'd expected some stuffy businessman type, but the man who stood up to greet me was anything but. He was tall, with messy dark hair and a crooked smile. "Hey," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Jack. You must be Julia?" I shook his hand, trying not to show my surprise. "Yeah, that's me." Jack's father cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." As soon as the door closed behind him, Jack's casual demeanor vanished. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry about this. My dad, he's got some pretty old-fashioned ideas. I shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. It's fine. We're both adults, right? We can handle this. Jack laughed, but it sounded forced. Yeah, sure. Just a casual arranged marriage. No big deal. We spent the next hour talking, and I hate to admit it, but Jack was kind of interesting. He was smart and funny, even if he did seem a bit irresponsible. I could see why his father wanted him to grow up. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I started dating, if you could call it that. We went out to dinners, movies, the usual stuff. But there was always this undercurrent of awkwardness. We both knew this wasn't real, no matter how much we pretended. And so, 6 months after that fateful meeting in Caldwell's office, I found myself walking down the aisle. My dad looked so proud, so happy. He had no idea of the deal I'd made to save his company. As I said my vows, I looked into Jack's eyes. There was no love there, not really. But there was friendship, and maybe that could be enough. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne. Jack's mother, Elizabeth, cornered me at one point, her smile tight. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "I do hope you'll make Jack happy." I plastered on my best fake smile. "I'll certainly try, Mrs. Caldwell." As we left for our honeymoon, I caught a glimpse of my father-in-law. He was beaming, clearly pleased with himself. I felt a flash of anger. This was all just a game to him. The first few years of our marriage were interesting, to say the least. Jack and I settled into a routine of sorts. We lived in a nice house, courtesy of his father's wealth, but it felt more like we were roommates than husband and wife. I tried my best to be a good influence on Jack. Slowly but surely, I saw changes in him. He started spending less time with his party-loving friends and more time at the office with his father. I could see the pride in his father's eyes when Jack started showing real interest in the business. It made me feel like maybe this whole arrangement wasn't for nothing. Jack's mother, on the other hand, was a different story. She never outright said anything, but I could feel her disapproval radiating off her in waves. The way she'd purse her lips when I spoke, or the backhanded compliments she'd give. "Oh, Julia, that dress is interesting. So brave of you to wear something like that." I'd grit my teeth and smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Despite the challenges, I held on to hope. Maybe, just maybe, Jack and I could grow to love each other. Maybe when we had kids, things would change. But life had other plans. It was a crisp fall day when we got the news. Jack and I sat in the doctor's office, the silence heavy between us. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, his voice gentle. "But the tests show that you, Mr. Caldwell, are unable to father children." The words hit me like a physical blow. No children. The one thing I'd been counting on to bring us closer, to make this marriage real, was now impossible. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about my own parents. Dad's business had flourished since my marriage to Jack. He'd even managed to double his turnover. I was happy for him, truly. But I couldn't help feeling a bit lost. I wanted to work, to have a purpose beyond being Jack's wife. But when I brought it up to him, his response was swift and firm. "Work? Why would you need to work? We have more than enough money." "It's not about the money, Jack. I want to do something meaningful." He shook his head. "In our circle, wives don't work. They do charity. Why don't you start a foundation or something?" And so, the Julia Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer was born. It wasn't what I'd imagined for myself, but it gave me purpose. I threw myself into the work, organizing fundraisers, visiting hospitals, doing whatever I could to help. Jack didn't seem to care much about my new passion. In fact, he didn't seem to care much about anything I did these days. We were living parallel lives, inhabiting the same space, but rarely intersecting. Years passed. 10, to be exact. And then, everything changed again. Jack's father died suddenly of a heart attack. Just like that, Jack was thrust into the role of CEO. I tried to be supportive, but I could see him struggling under the weight of his new responsibilities. 2 years after that, we got more bad news. Jack's mother had cancer. "We should move her to a care facility," Jack said, his voice detached. "They can take better care of her there." But his mother refused. "I will die in my own home," she declared, her chin lifted defiantly. And so, drawing on my years of experience with the Cancer Foundation, I took charge of her care. I hired nurses, coordinated treatments, and spent hours by her bedside. To my surprise, Elizabeth's attitude towards me began to soften. One day, as I was adjusting her pillows, she caught my hand. "You're a good woman, Julia," she said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." 5 years passed since Jack took over his father's company. I wish I could say things improved, but the truth was far from it. Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was drinking more, coming home at odd hours, and snapping at me for the smallest things. One day, I received a call from Jack's assistant. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Caldwell hasn't been to the office in days. Is everything all right?" When he finally stumbled home that night, reeking of alcohol, I confronted him. "Jack, what's happening?" "Your assistant called." "You haven't been to work?" He laughed bitterly. "Work? What's the point? The company's going under anyway." Dear old Dad left me a sinking ship, and I couldn't keep it afloat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of hard work, gone? And Jack seemed almost relieved? Desperate to salvage something, I reached out to my father. Despite being semi-retired, he agreed to help. He offered Jack a position as his deputy, hoping to mentor him back to success. But Jack's heart wasn't in it. He showed up late, left early, and generally did the bare minimum. I watched helplessly as my father's sales figures began to drop. I knew I had to have a serious talk with Jack. One night, after he'd had a few drinks, as usual, I approached him. "Jack, we need to talk about work. You're barely showing up. My father's company is suffering because of you." Jack's face contorted with anger. "Oh, so now it's my fault? I never wanted this, Jules. Any of it." "What are you talking about?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This life. This marriage. I'm just waiting for Mom to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and get out of here." I stared at him, horrified. "How can you say that? Your mother is dying, and all you care about is her money? Don't act all high and mighty," he spat. "We both know this marriage is a sham. You're just as eager to get out as I am." Disgusted, I turned to leave the room. As I opened the door, I came face to face with Jack's mother. The look on her face told me she'd heard everything. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, silently, she reached out and squeezed my hand. In that gesture, I felt her gratitude, her understanding, and her sorrow. The day I got the call about my parents' plane crash, my world shattered. Mom and Dad, gone in an instant. Their small plane to Hawaii, meant to be a second honeymoon, became their final journey. I needed support, someone to lean on. But Jack? He was nowhere to be found. My own husband couldn't even be bothered to show up to the funeral. As I stood there, watching my parents' caskets lowered into the ground, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, anger began to replace my sorrow. How dare he? How could he abandon me when I needed him most? With this newfound fury fueling me, I marched into Dad's company, our company now, I supposed. The sight that greeted me when I entered Dad's old office made my blood boil. There was Jack, lounging in Dad's chair like he owned the place, barking orders like some conquering hero. "Jack," I said, my voice tight with barely contained rage. "We need to talk." He looked up, his face a mask of annoyance. "What is it now, Jules? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Busy? I spat. You couldn't even be busy enough to come to my parents' funeral. Jack rolled his eyes. Oh, here we go with the moralizing again. You know what, Jules? Always nagging, always pushing. Well, I'm done with it. And I'm done with you. I stared at him, shocked. Then I saw something change in his eyes. A cold, calculating look replaced the anger. You know, Jules, he said, his voice suddenly calm. This company? It's worth about $17 million. And guess what? As deputy director, it's all mine now. My heart dropped. What are you talking about? He leaned back in the chair, Dad's chair, with a smug smile. I'm the deputy director. I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm in charge now, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't do this, I said, my voice shaking. You've already run your father's company into the ground. I won't let you do the same to my father's legacy. Jack laughed, a cold, harsh sound. Oh, I'm not going to run it. I'm going to sell it, piece by piece. And then I'm going to live like a king. Before I could stop him, he turned to the computer. I watched in horror as he transferred a large sum from the company account to his personal one. There, he said, turning back to me. That should keep me comfortable for a while. Then, as if this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. He tossed them at me casually. Oh, and here, divorce papers. I think it's time we ended this farce, don't you? I caught the papers reflexively, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was too much, too fast. My parents dead, my marriage over, my father's company being stolen right in front of me. I left the office in a daze, divorce papers clutched in my hand. But as I walked, something inside me shifted. I'd spent years bending to Jack's will, to his father's manipulations. No more. It was time to fight back. With renewed determination, I headed straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Henderson had been Dad's friend and confidant for years. If anyone could help me, it would be him. Julia, Mr. Henderson said, rising to greet me as I entered his office. I'm so sorry about your parents. How are you holding up? I collapsed into the chair across from him, the events of the day spilling out in a rush. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. Julia, I think it's time I shared something with you. Your father's will. He made some changes just before the accident. As he read the will, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The company, it was mine. All mine. Dad had left it to me, not Jack. But there was more. Mr. Henderson looked up from the papers, his eyes twinkling. There's something else you should know. Your father dismissed Jack 2 weeks before his death. Fired him outright. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. So all those orders Jack was giving. Completely meaningless, Mr. Henderson confirmed. Then he pulled out an envelope. There's one more thing. A letter from your father. With shaking hands, I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dearest Julia, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving you like this, but I hope I've left you with the tools to build the life you deserve. The company is yours now. And Jules? It's time to let go of Jack. You've given enough of yourself to that marriage. It's time to live for you. I love you, sweetheart. Make me proud. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, wiping my eyes. Do you have a pen? Without a word, he handed me one. I signed the divorce papers Jack had given me, feeling lighter with each stroke of the pen. Can you file these? I asked, handing them back. I want this done as quickly as possible. Mr. Henderson nodded. Consider it done. As I left his office, I felt free. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I was in control of my own life. No more Jack, no more Caldwell's pulling my strings. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, my best friend from the charity foundation. Sarah? It's Julia. Want to meet for coffee? I've got some news. An hour later, we were seated in our favorite cafe, lattes in hand. So, Sarah said, eyeing me curiously. What's this big news? I took a deep breath, then let it all out. Jack, the company, the divorce. Sarah listened, her eyes widening. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Girl, you're free. And now you're the boss. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. I don't know, Sarah. Can I really run a company? She fixed me with a stern look. Are you kidding me? Julia, you've been running that charity foundation like a pro for years. You're smart, you're organized, and you actually care about people. You're going to be an amazing CEO. After my talk with Sarah, I felt invigorated. It was time to face the music and get my things from Jack's house. I never really thought of it as my home, and now I knew why. I found my mother-in-law, Elizabeth, in the living room. Her face was drawn, tired from her ongoing battle with cancer. Elizabeth, I said gently, I'm here to get my things. Jack and I, we're getting divorced. To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. Julia, I know I haven't always been kind to you. But you've been so good to me. Would you consider taking me with you? I was stunned. You want to come with me? Before she could answer, the front door slammed open. Jack stormed in, his face red with fury. You, he shouted, pointing at me. What the hell did you do? The company accounts are blocked. I can't access the money. I straightened my spine, looking him dead in the eye. That money isn't yours, Jack. It never was. Oh, and by the way, my father fired you 2 weeks ago. You have no claim to the company. I've already instructed security not to let you in the building. Jack's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then his gaze shifted, noticing his mother packing a suitcase. Mom, what are you doing? Elizabeth looked at her son, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. I'm going with Julia. I'm sorry, Jack, but you've proven to be unreliable. Jack's face turned an even deeper shade of red. Unreliable? Me? This is all your fault. You raised me to be this way. You and your coddling and your expectations. He turned to me, his voice dripping with venom. Fine, get out. Both of you. I don't need either of you. I felt a wave of pity for him. This angry, bitter man was a far cry from the charming, if irresponsible, guy I'd married. But I couldn't let that sway me. Not anymore. Come on, Elizabeth, I said softly. Let's get your things. As we packed, Jack continued to rant and rave, hurling insults and blame. But we tuned him out, focusing on the task at hand. The drive to my parents' house was quiet. Elizabeth dozed in the passenger seat, the stress of the day taking its toll. As we pulled up to the house, a lump formed in my throat. It felt strange coming here without Mom and Dad. We're here, I said softly, gently waking Elizabeth. I helped her inside, leading her to my parents' room. It felt right, somehow, to give her the space. Are you sure? Elizabeth asked, her eyes wide as she took in the room. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Yes. I think they would have wanted it this way. As I helped Elizabeth settle in, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for my parents, relief at being free from Jack, uncertainty about the future. But underneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. Taking over Dad's company was like diving into the deep end of a pool without knowing how to swim. Those first few months were a whirlwind of meetings, financial reports, and sleepless nights. But I was determined to make it work. I hired Tom, a brilliant business consultant, as my right-hand man. He patiently guided me through the intricacies of running a multi-million-dollar company. "You've got good instincts, Julia," he'd say. "Trust them." Slowly but surely, I found my footing. 6 months in, I wasn't just treading water, I was swimming laps. The company's performance began to improve, and I felt a surge of pride knowing Dad would have been pleased. Through it all, I never neglected the Cancer Foundation. If anything, my work there became even more important to me. It was a link to my past and a beacon for my future. Elizabeth's condition worsened over time. I threw myself into her care, determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. We grew close during those 2 years, healing old wounds and forming a bond one never thought possible. The day she passed, I held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Elizabeth." She squeezed my hand weakly, a small smile on her face, before slipping away peacefully. I organized the funeral myself, making sure everything was perfect. Jack didn't show up. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung to see how far he'd fallen. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Henderson. "Julia, there's something you need to see. Can you come to my office?" When I arrived, I was shocked to see Jack there, a young blonde hanging off his arm. He smirked at me. "Well, if it isn't the little CEO. Don't worry, I'm just here to collect my inheritance. Mom and I might have had our differences, but blood is thicker than water, right?" I bit my tongue, waiting for Mr. Henderson to speak. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Elizabeth's will. As he spoke, I watched Jack's smug expression morph into disbelief, then fury. "And so, I leave my house and all my savings to Julia Thompson, with the stipulation that the money be donated to the Cancer Foundation she so passionately supports." Tears sprang to my eyes. Elizabeth's final act of kindness overwhelmed me. Jack exploded. "This is bullshit. She manipulated Mom. She's a fraud, a gold digger. She ruined my life, and now she's stealing my inheritance." His girlfriend, looking bewildered, stepped away from him. "You said we'd be set for life with this money. I'm out of here." She stormed out, leaving Jack sputtering. As I left the office, I heard Jack's continued ranting fade behind me. I felt light, free. Elizabeth's gift wasn't just about the money, it was validation. She had seen me, truly seen me, and found me worthy. Hi there, I'm Ava. I work as an insurance agent, a job that keeps me glued to my desk or on the phone most days. I live in a cozy house that my grandma left me when she passed. It's a bit old-fashioned, but filled with memories and comfort. My life's pretty routine: work, home, a bit of gardening, and then some more work. Dating? Who's got the time? After another long day filled with claims and paperwork, the loneliness of the big, quiet house really hit me. That's when I thought, why not try online dating? I took a couple of decent pics in front of the house and some from my trips to Europe last summer, slapped them up on a dating site, and hoped for the best. Barely had I refreshed the page when a message popped up. It was from Ethan. His profile showed a guy with a confident smile, standing in a garage full of cars. The caption said he ran his own car repair shop. Just my type, a guy who knew how to handle tools. We hit it off right from our first chat. Ethan was straightforward, no airs about him. He said, "Hey Ava, I see you've been to Italy. Got any good travel stories?" I laughed, typing back quickly. If getting lost in Venice and ending up on a private gondola counts, then yeah, loads. "Sounds like my kind of adventure," he replied. And just like that, we kept messaging back and forth. He had a sense of humor that made even a bad day good. Our first date was at a local diner. Nothing fancy, just good burgers and fries. When I saw him waiting outside, leaning against his beat-up truck, he waved and grinned. It was easy to smile back. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the milkshakes we ordered. Ethan was all about his shop and the cars, and I shared tales from the insurance battlefield. But when he talked about his family, his tone changed a bit. "I owe a lot to my mom, you know? She raised me by herself. I didn't think much of it then. I was too caught up in his stories, his laughter, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his latest car restoration. By the end of the evening, I was glad I took the plunge into online dating. Ethan was a breath of fresh air, someone who seemed genuinely into the things I cared about. We made plans to meet again, and I went home feeling something I hadn't in a while: excitement. The more we dated, the closer we got, and it didn't take long before we were talking about a future together. He was easy to love, with his quick smiles and the way he'd fix anything that broke around my house, just like he promised. But as our wedding day neared, Ethan dropped a bit of a bombshell on me. "You know, Ava, my mom and I are really close," he said one evening as we were scrolling through potential wedding venues on his laptop. "I mean, she's pretty much my best friend." I smiled, finding his devotion sweet. "That's really nice, Ethan. It's good to see a man who cares about his family." "Yeah, she's been through a lot, just us two for so many years. She means the world to me." He glanced at me, maybe checking to see if I was okay with this level of attachment. "Of course, I get it," I reassured him, squeezing his hand. I met Maggie a week later at her quaint little house that seemed frozen in another era. Ethan had hyped up how much she was going to love me. But the reality? It was like hitting a wall of ice. She was polite, sure, but there was a stiffness to her smile, a reserve in her hello. During dinner, I tried to make conversation, really I did. "This casserole is delicious, Maggie. Ethan told me you're the best cook." But Maggie turned to Ethan, ignoring my attempt. "Ethan, did you look into that garage space for rent down by Baker Street?" I sat there, stirring my food around the plate, feeling more like a spectator than a part of the family. It didn't get any better as the night went on. Each attempt I made to draw her out was met with brief answers and swift diversions back to Ethan. On our drive home, I couldn't help but express my frustration. "Does your mom not like me?" I felt like she didn't really want to talk to me at all tonight. Ethan was quick to defend her. "Nah, she's just not very good with new people. Give her time, she'll warm up to you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. So, I brushed it off and focused on the wedding plans. But every visit after that was a repeat performance. Maggie's warmth surfaced only when she wanted to know about my financial stability or the house I lived in. "So, Ava," Maggie began one afternoon, a sudden interest lighting up her face as we discussed the wedding guest list. "This house you live in, it's the one you inherited from your grandmother, right?" "Yes, it's been in the family for years," I said, cautious but trying to keep the conversation friendly. "And I suppose you have everything sorted out with your finances? Savings and such?" Her eyes were sharp, assessing. I stiffened, feeling like I was under a microscope. "Yes, I've been very careful with my finances." That's good, that's good. It's important to have a solid foundation. Especially in a marriage," she added, her gaze flickering between Ethan and me. The conversation drifted back to mundane wedding details, but the seed of unease was planted. Maggie's questions lingered in my mind, painting my thoughts with doubt. What was her angle? Was she just being overly protective, or was there something more calculating beneath her questions? Ethan seemed oblivious to these subtleties, always smoothing over any awkwardness with a joke or a change of topic. Mom's just being mom, he'd laugh whenever I brought up how she made me feel. As the wedding day drew near, the excitement I felt was tinged with nerves, not just about the big day, but about everything that was becoming increasingly complicated with Ethan's family. A question that had been nagging at me finally slipped out one evening while Ethan and I were checking off items on our to-do list. "Ethan, how come your dad isn't on the guest list?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I was genuinely curious. He looked up from his list, a frown briefly crossing his face. "My dad? Ava, he left us when I was just a kid. He made his choice, Ava. I don't see any reason to drag up the past now." I nodded, respecting his feelings, but something didn't sit right with me. It felt like there was more to the story, and on a whim, I decided to dig a little deeper. Using a bit of my insurance sleuthing skills, I managed to find a contact number for Ethan's dad, Michael. The next day, while Ethan was at work, I made the call, my heart racing as it rang. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cautious, reserved. "Hi, Michael? My name's Ava. I'm Ethan's fiancée. We're getting married soon, and I thought you should know." I stumbled through my introduction. There was a pause, a heavy silence that made me think he might just hang up. But then he spoke, his voice laced with a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Ava, that's news. But listen, I think it's best if I stay out of it. Ethan's made it clear he doesn't want me in his life." His words were calm but firm, yet he added something that sent chills down my spine. "Just be careful, Ava. With him and his mother. There's more going on there than you might realize." I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, bewildered. Was he just a bitter ex-husband and father, or was there really something I needed to be wary of? Shaking off the unease, I decided he must just be a little out of his mind, as Ethan had implied. The wedding day arrived, and it was like a dream. Everything was perfect, from the weather to the flowers. But even the most beautiful day couldn't keep the shadows at bay. Maggie, Ethan's mother, was a force to be reckoned with. From the moment the ceremony started, she was ever present, hovering close to Ethan, adjusting his tie, whispering in his ear. At the reception, I hoped we could finally have our moment, but Maggie had other plans. When it came time to cut the cake, she brushed past me, a tight smile on her face. "I'll handle this, dear," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I am the main hostess, after all." I watched, stunned, as she took the knife and started slicing the cake, her other hand possessively on Ethan's shoulder. The guests clapped, but the applause felt hollow. I felt more like a guest at my own wedding than the bride. Throughout the evening, Maggie made sure to position herself prominently in every photo, always inserting herself between Ethan and me. Her laughter was forced, her joy seemingly more about her victory in maintaining control than about our happiness. Ethan and I settled into my grandmother's house. Everything was going smoothly, or so I thought, until the dynamic shifted dramatically with Maggie's regular intrusions. Every weekend, we'd go over to Maggie's for dinner, and it was like stepping into a minefield. She was all sweet smiles to Ethan while serving up a side of snide remarks to me. "Ava, try the roast. You might learn a thing or two about cooking," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sarcasm that made my skin crawl. Ethan would just chuckle, clueless, or maybe just unwilling to catch the barbs. "Mom's right. Nobody cooks like her," he'd laugh, completely missing the tension. One Sunday, as she filled Ethan's plate with a heap of mashed potatoes, she shot me a look that could chill coffee. "Darling, make sure Ava takes some notes. She might finally get it right." Ethan roared with laughter, not seeing the hurt in my eyes. "Good one, Mom." 3 months into our marriage, I came home from work to find Maggie on my doorstep, her suitcases piled beside her like some fortress wall. "Ava, dear, I'm feeling unwell, and it's just not safe for me to be alone anymore. I hope you don't mind if I stay here for a while." Before I could even process the request, Ethan came rushing over, wrapping his arms around her. "Of course, Mom. You're always welcome here." Just like that, she moved in. It was as if I had no say in my own home. Maggie took over the house with an iron fist and a velvet glove for Ethan. She did nothing around the house, claiming her health was too frail, leaving me to pick up the slack. My home quickly felt more like a prison, and Maggie was the warden. In the evenings, the living room turned into their private club. They'd watch TV together while I was left to my own devices, feeling more like a ghost than a wife in my own home. Weekends were even worse. They'd go shopping without me, as if I didn't exist. One evening, I gathered my courage at dinner. As we sat at the table, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Maggie, do you have any idea when you might be feeling better? To maybe go back home?" The room fell deathly silent. Ethan's fork clattered to his plate as he stared at me, his face contorting in anger. Are you trying to kick my mom out? He exploded, his voice filling the room with a cold fury I hadn't seen before. No, Ethan, that's not what I meant. I was just asking because. But he didn't let me finish. He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. Maggie sat there, a smug smile playing on her lips, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Looks like you put your foot in it, dear, she taunted, her voice low and menacing. I sat there, stunned and alone, the clinking of cutlery echoing my shaking hands. What was happening? How had my life turned into this nightmare? One morning, I was pulling out my favorite blouse for work when I noticed it looked off. The color was faded, the fabric rough, and the seams slightly torn. Puzzled, I dug through my wardrobe and found more of my clothes in similar states of ruin. That's odd, I muttered to myself, examining a particularly discolored sweater. Maggie, who was always buzzing around, chimed in with a too-sweet tone. Oh, dear, that's my fault. I mixed up the laundry last week, must have used the wrong detergent. You know how it is, these things happen. Her words dripped with faux concern, but the glint in her eyes said otherwise. It was clear, this was no accident. This was on purpose. And sure enough, none of Ethan's clothes showed any signs of damage. When I confronted Ethan about it later that day, his reaction was dismissive at best. You know how Mom is. She's getting older, mistakes happen. Looks like you're not taking good enough care of your stuff, Ava. His words stung, and I felt a cold realization settling in. I was alone in this. As days turned into weeks, more of my things started to mysteriously deteriorate. My favorite lipstick found smashed, my skincare creams diluted, Maggie's tactics grew bolder. The strain was unbearable, and one evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Ethan, this can't be a coincidence anymore. Your mother, she's doing this on purpose. She's ruining my things. I exclaimed, my voice tinged with desperation. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he sighed. Look, Ava, maybe you need a break from all this stress. Hey, I know, I've got just the thing. I got us a gift, a weekend trip, a mountain hike. It'll be good for you. My heart lifted at the idea. Really? Just the two of us? That sounds wonderful, Ethan. His face shifted uncomfortably. Well, actually, I was thinking, it could be a great chance for you and Mom to patch things up. She's excited about the trip too. My heart sank. You want me to go hiking with your mother? After everything? It's either that or you don't really care about making our family work, he shot back, a harsh edge to his voice that I hadn't heard before. I was trapped. So, I agreed, defeated and utterly drained. When I told Maggie, her response was unnervingly cheerful. That sounds lovely, dear. We'll have such a good time, she beamed, her satisfaction evident. That night, as I packed my backpack, the weight of what lay ahead felt heavier than any mountain gear. The thought of spending days in the wilderness with Maggie was daunting. The morning of the hike was crisp and cool, the air fresh with the scent of pine and earth. As we set out with our group, Maggie seemed unusually pleasant, chatting with other hikers and even sharing jokes. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The scenery was breathtaking, with vast landscapes stretching out under a brilliant blue sky. Maggie kept pace and didn't complain, which eased some of my tension. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a new beginning for us. However, as the terrain became more challenging, Maggie began to slow down, her breaths turning heavy. Ava, darling, I need to rest for a bit. Go on, I'll catch up, she gasped, stopping to lean against a boulder. I'll stay with you for a bit. We can go slow, I said, settling next to her. After a short rest, we attempted to catch up with the group, but Maggie's pace was slow, and it wasn't long before we were alone. The sounds of our companions faded into the distance. How far do you think they've gone? Maggie asked, her voice tinged with worry. Please check from that rock over there. You might get a better view. As I climbed the rock, focused on locating our group, I felt a sudden, sharp shove from behind. My feet lost their grip, and I tumbled forward, the ground rushing up to meet me as I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, the pain hit me like a wave. My arms were scraped and bruised, throbbing with each heartbeat. Worse, my leg was twisted at an odd angle, pain flaring with even the slightest movement. Panic set in as I realized Maggie was gone, along with my backpack that had my phone, water, and food. "Maggie!" I screamed, hoping she was nearby, that this was some terrible mistake. But there was no answer, just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. As dusk approached, I knew I couldn't stay on the ground, the risk of wild animals was too real. Wincing with every movement, I managed to pull myself onto a large rock, where I spent a chilling, miserable night, shivering and waiting for dawn. At first light, I forced myself off the rock, pain shooting through my leg. I had to find our trail, had to get back to where the bus would meet us. Every step was agony, but the thought of being left behind drove me forward. Hours passed, each one a test of my will. Finally, I heard voices. A group of hikers appeared like a mirage through my tears of pain and relief. "Help! Please, I need help!" I cried out, my voice hoarse. They didn't waste time with more questions. One of them radioed for help while the others made me as comfortable as they could. Eventually, rescue services arrived, and I was transported to a hospital, the pain a constant companion. I woke up to the sterile whiteness of the hospital room, the beeping of machines punctuating the silence. My injuries ached, but the pain was dulled by relief. I was alive, rescued, and far from the perilous cold of the mountain. Tears of happiness rolled down my cheeks, not just from the pain, but from the sheer joy of survival. With trembling fingers, I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My first call was to Ethan. My heart pounded as I dialed the number from memory, rehearsing the words in my mind. He needed to know the truth about his mother, about what happened. "Ethan, it's me," I started, my voice quivering. "I need to tell you something important. Your mom, she pushed me off a rock and left me there." His response came fast and fierce, a torrent of anger that I hadn't anticipated. "You're lying," he yelled into the phone. "My mom told me everything. She said you abandoned her up there and faked your injuries. How could you accuse her of such a thing?" "I'm not lying, Ethan. It's the truth. She left me there alone." My plea cracked with emotion. "You're just trying to tear us apart. I can't believe you'd stoop this low. You know what? I don't want to see you. I want a divorce." His words were like daggers, and before I could respond, he hung up. Stunned, I lay back against the pillows. His words echoed in my mind, a harsh reminder of the tangled web I was caught in. As I processed the shock, a thought surfaced, the warnings from Ethan's father, Michael. Maybe he would understand, maybe he could help. I found his number and dialed with shaky hands. "Michael, it's Ava. I need to talk to you, it's urgent," I said as soon as he answered. He was at the hospital within the hour, his expression grave. We sat in the small, cramped space of the hospital room, and I told him everything. Michael listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "I've always known she was too attached to Ethan, but this is something else. She once tried to harm me too, did something to my car brakes. Wanted Ethan to have everything. Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I had no proof, just suspicions. Nothing concrete enough to take to the authorities," he explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We need to do something, Michael. We can't let her get away with this," I insisted, the resolve hardening in my voice. That night, lying in the dim glow of the hospital room, I called my mother. It took some persuasion, but she agreed to play a part in the plan we were forming. "Mom, just casually mention to Ethan that I'm dying. Say the injuries were worse than they thought," I instructed her, my voice low. The morning after my call with my mother, the hospital room's door swung open. I braced myself as Ethan and Maggie strode in, their faces a mix of faux concern and barely concealed eagerness. I lay there, my breathing shallow, feigning the brink of death as we had planned. "Oh, Ava, you look terrible," Maggie said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, but her eyes glinting with something akin to triumph. I moaned weakly, keeping my eyes half closed as Ethan hovered by the bedside, his expression conflicted but mostly impatient. Maggie leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough. "Everything's going as planned, Ethan. Soon, all this, her house, her money, it'll all be yours." Ethan glanced around nervously before kissing his mother on the cheek. "I'm so tired of all this drama," he muttered. "It'd be easier if she just went quickly." My heart pounded at their words, a mixture of fear and fury coursing through me, but I held still, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. And to think, Maggie chuckled quietly, her cold breath brushing my face. It was so easy to push her off that cliff. She actually thought I was tired. And when I told the others she'd gone back on another bus, they believed it. That was the moment Michael chose to enter, his timing perfect. "Got all that, have you?" he announced loudly, holding up his phone, which had been recording their conversation. The color drained from Ethan and Maggie's faces as they realized what had happened. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, while Maggie's initial shock quickly morphed into a scowl. She made a move as if to snatch the phone, but Michael stepped back, blocking her path. "The police are on their way," Michael stated firmly. I sat up then, throwing off the guise of weakness. "And here's something else for you," I said, holding out the divorce papers to Ethan. His shock turned to horror as he took the documents, his hands shaking. "You'll pay for everything. All of it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Ethan turned to his father, desperation in his voice. "You can't let them lock me up, Dad. You'd have no one left." Michael's expression was one of utter disdain. "Actually, I will have someone. Ava's pregnant. And I will make sure my grandchild and Ava have everything they need." The revelation hit everyone like a bolt. Ethan staggered as if struck, his face ashen, while Maggie's eyes widened in disbelief. Before more could be said, the police arrived. They listened briefly to Michael's explanation, checked his recording, and then handcuffed Ethan and Maggie. As they were led away, the reality of their situation finally seemed to dawn on them. In the months that followed, the trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable, and both Ethan and his mother were sentenced to significant terms. The house became peaceful again, and with Michael's support, I prepared for the new life I was about to bring into the world. When my son was born, it was with a sense of relief and renewal. Michael was there, beaming, as he held his grandson for the first time. "He's going to have a good life," he promised, and I believed him. Ever since I was a kid, I knew I'd be helping people. Growing up, every time I patched up a scraped knee or helped soothe a fever, it felt right. I'm Anna, by the way. My journey into the medical world wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I clung to it with everything I had. The university was my escape and my battlefield. I wasn't the top of my class, but I hustled hard. Nursing wasn't just a program, it was a ticket to making a real difference. And hell, I worked every angle, from grueling night shifts at the local clinic to volunteering at blood drives. Anything to build that resume and keep the scholarships coming. After getting my degree, I stayed in the city. The hospital gigs were fine, but something was missing. That's when I stumbled into cosmetology. It might not sound like life-saving stuff, but you'd be surprised how much a good skin day can mean to someone who's been battling acne or scars. I hustled some more, saved up, and eventually, with a chunky loan weighing down my bank account, I opened my own small office. It was just a tiny room in a shared space, but it was mine. It was at one of these rare gatherings with friends, you know, the kind where you realize you haven't seen each other in ages and everything just clicks, that I met David. He was a friend of a friend, typical setup. "So, you're like a nurse or something?" David asked, beer in hand, an easy smile on his face. Was. Now I'm a cosmetologist. I own my place, I said, a little too defensively, expecting the usual judgment. That's badass. Running your own show. Must be nice calling the shots, he said, genuinely impressed, not a hint of sarcasm. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Hard, but cool, I admitted, warming up to his interest. The night faded into a blur of laughter and music, but David's words stuck with me. He wasn't like the others who just nodded along. He got it, the grind, the passion. It was refreshing. Life before David was simple. Work, pay bills, hang out sometimes. But after that night, things changed. We started seeing each other, and every date, every late night call, it just felt like, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't in this all alone anymore. Over the next few months, we found our rhythm. He'd text me in the morning, something goofy to start the day. I'd call him on my breaks, just hearing about his day made the hours easier. He worked in tech, something about networks, and a lot of complaining about how nobody appreciated good code. He met my friends, I met his. His mom, Mrs. Walker, took to me right away. She was a stout woman, strong in her opinions, and generous with her laughter. The first time I met her, she hugged me like we were long-lost family. David hasn't shut up about you, she whispered in my ear. About time he found someone who can keep up with him. We had dinner at her place one Sunday. It was all very casual, homemade lasagna, and stories about David's childhood. He used to run around barefoot all summer. She laughed, said shoes made him slow. David blushed, tried to change the subject. Mom, come on, don't embarrass me. Oh, hush, let her see you're not as cool as you pretend, Mrs. Walker teased, and we all laughed. It was easy, comfortable. It felt right, being there with them. After about a year, things got serious. We were spending almost every night together, and not just at my place. One chilly evening, wrapped up in blankets on my tiny balcony, David broke the silence. Anna, I've been thinking about us. I tensed, uncertain. Yeah? What about us? He took a deep breath, his hand finding mine under the blanket. I know I want to build something with you. A real life. What do you think? My heart raced, but I played it cool. Build something, huh? Like Lego or more a Monopoly kind of deal? He chuckled, squeezing my hand. Funny. I mean a life, Anna. Together. Maybe even think about getting a place, something permanent. The idea was terrifying and exciting all at once. I'd like that, I admitted. A lot. So, we started planning, dreaming really. It wasn't just about moving in or the next few years. We talked about everything, kids, careers, buying a house. He proposed not long after that night, nothing fancy, just us, which was perfect. Marry me, Anna. Let's do this for real. In a small, candlelit room, with the curtains drawn and rain tapping softly against the window, I said yes. It was the easiest yes I've ever said. The wedding planning started soon after. Mrs. Walker was a godsend, knowing just who to call, what to book, making it all seem easy. You just worry about being happy, I'll handle the stress, she insisted, and I let her, grateful for her support. It was simple, but perfect. A small ceremony, our closest friends and family, and an air of hope around us. As I walked down the aisle, seeing David there, waiting, I felt like everything was falling into place. He grinned, that lopsided grin that made me fall for him, and I knew, no matter what came our way, we'd handle it. Together. David moved into my apartment, the one I'd been renting since my cosmetologist days were just a dream. We unpacked, merged our books and dishes, and figured out whose art got wall space. It was cozy, happy chaos. The first few weeks, we'd sit at the little dining table with our laptops and piles of bills, making budgets like some kind of grown-up team. I'll handle the groceries and utilities, David offered one evening, his eyes serious as he typed out a spreadsheet. I nodded, scribbling on a notepad. And I'll keep smashing at this loan. The sooner it's gone, the sooner we can think about a house. And, maybe kids. Even saying it felt big, full of possibilities. David smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Sounds like a plan, babe. Everything seemed lined up just right. But then, things with Mrs. Walker shifted. She'd been like a second mom during the wedding prep, but suddenly, I was out of the circle. No more Sunday dinners, no calls. When I asked David about it, he'd shrug, looking uncomfortable. She's got her moods, Her health isn't great these days. Maybe give her some space, he suggested one night when I brought it up after another missed call. I wanted to dig deeper, but the wall in his eyes told me to leave it. So, I dropped it. Maybe it was easier, not pushing. A year into our marriage, though, another crack appeared. David's steady support began to wane. Bills piled up on my desk, and his contributions dwindled to nothing. I found myself covering everything, from rent to the electric bill. Babe, what's going on? I finally confronted him one evening, bills in hand. This is the third month you've not chipped in. David looked away, tension in his jaw. It's my mom. She's really sick, Anna. Hospital bills, medications, it's a lot. I've had to help out. Okay, I get family first, but we're supposed to be a team. You should have said something. I snapped, feeling both worried and betrayed. I know. I'm sorry, babe. Just, can you handle things for a bit longer? I'll make it up to you, I promise. His voice was earnest, pleading. So, I tightened our belts. I called my parents, hating every minute of it. Mom, Dad, I hate to ask, but could you help out a little this month? Just until we get back on our feet. They said what they could, never asking if David was pulling his weight. I didn't have the heart to tell them he wasn't. Work became my refuge and my prison. I skipped lunches, booked clients back to back. Sundays off became a memory. I barely saw David, he was either at work or helping his mom. Our apartment felt too big without him, the silence too loud. One rare evening together, I tried to bridge the gap. We're in this together, right? Tell me what's going on, really. David, looking worn and thin, just shook his head. It's just really bad right now. Mom's fading, and I can't think beyond that. I nodded, swallowing my frustration. Okay, but remember, I'm here. We're supposed to do this together. Over a year had passed since David started shifting all his financial responsibilities onto me. Meanwhile, I managed to pay off the loan for my office. Finally, that tiny room was all mine, every inch a testament to the sweat and late nights I'd poured into it. But as my professional dreams solidified, my personal life with David crumbled. Money, or the lack of it, became a constant shadow over us. He'd promised things would get better once he took on a second job, but if anything, they got worse. David was never home, and the few bucks he contributed might as well have been pennies thrown into a well. One night, when I heard the door creak open way past midnight, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I sat at the kitchen table, bills and overdue notices spread out like a deck of bad luck. David, I started, my voice tight. We need to talk. This, I waved at the pile, isn't sustainable. He sighed, a deep, weary sound, and sank into the chair opposite me. He looked as run down as I felt. I know it's tough, Anna, but I'm doing everything I can. Mom's bills are they're killing me. And what about us? Our bills? I shot back, frustration spiking. When is it going to be enough, David? David looked at me, really looked, and for a second, I thought he might finally understand. But then he dropped the bomb. Maybe we could sell your office? Just until things stabilize. It would give us some breathing room. I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling into a nasty knot in my stomach. Sell my office? My dream? That's your solution? I stood up, pushing my chair back so hard it screeched against the tile. David flinched, but pushed on. It's just until we get back on our feet. I'm out there busting my ass every day and night, Anna. And what? You think I'm not? My voice rose, sharp and raw. I built that business from nothing while paying half our bills on my own. And you want me to just give it up? He stood too, anger flashing in his eyes. Then what do you want me to do? Huh? Let my mother starve? That's not fair, and you know it. I was yelling now, too far gone to care about keeping it together. I want a partner, David, not just a roommate who leaves me to handle everything alone. We glared at each other, the air between us thick with unsaid things and regrets. Finally, David turned and walked away, the conversation unresolved, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. Our fights became frequent, each one chipping away at what was left of our marriage. Every discussion about money ended in raised voices and slammed doors. I began to wonder if the man I married was still there, somewhere beneath the stress and the desperation. It was an unusually quiet Tuesday when I decided to head home early after a client canceled last minute. I wasn't too upset about it, the extra time gave me a chance to catch up on some much-needed rest. Pushing open the door to our apartment, I was surprised to find David frantically ironing his black suit, the one he only wore to weddings or funerals. The sight stopped me dead in my tracks. David, what's going on? Why are you all dressed up like that? My voice echoed slightly in the hallway, tinged with confusion. He jumped a little, clearly not expecting me. His face went pale, then flushed, a clear sign he was nervous. It's my mom, Anna. She passed away last night. There's the funeral tomorrow. The news hit like a sucker punch. Despite everything, Mrs. Walker had been like family to me once. Oh, David, I'm so sorry. I'll come with you, of course. No. His response was sharp, slicing the air. She didn't want you there, Anna. Her last request. She said she never really liked you. His words were blunt, cold even. I recoiled as if slapped, my heart thumping painfully in my chest. Okay. If that's her wish. It hurt, more than I expected, but I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, stepping away to hide the hurt. David didn't say anything more. He just went back to his ironing, leaving me standing there, a mix of grief and confusion swirling inside me. That night, I lay in bed, thoughts racing. Something didn't sit right with me. Mrs. Walker and I had our differences, but this seemed too harsh even for her. The next morning, I watched from the window as David left, dressed in his suit, looking every part the grieving son. Once he was gone, I made a decision. I rescheduled my appointments and drove to Mrs. Walker's house, expecting to find a gathering of some sort, maybe just the tail end of it. But the street was quiet. Too quiet. Her house looked just like any other day, no cars lined up outside, no signs of a wake. Confusion led me to the front door, and on impulse, I rang the bell. The door swung open, and there she was, Mrs. Walker, very much alive, staring back at me with wide eyes. My heart stopped, then started at a sprint. You're alive? She took a step back, her own face a mask of shock. Anna? What on earth, why would you think otherwise? David told me you were, the words tangled in my throat, too surreal to voice fully. Dead? She finished for me, her brow furrowing in confusion and concern. My God, no. Come in, Anna. We need to sort this out. Numbly, I stepped inside, the familiar smells of her home wrapping around me like a bewildering comfort. We sat at her kitchen table, the same place we'd shared many cups of coffee. I don't understand. He said there was a funeral today. He was so upset. My voice trailed off as I pulled out my phone, the need to confront David growing urgent. But just as I was about to dial, my phone buzzed with a notification. David had started a live stream on Instagram. Curiosity overpowered everything else, and I clicked the link, my fingers trembling. There was a live broadcast of the funeral. But who was in the coffin if David's mother was sitting next to me? We needed to find out the truth, so we went to the funeral, finding out the exact address in one of the comments. As we drove, I couldn't help but replay the last few years in my mind, trying to piece together the deception. "So, he told you I didn't want to see you?" I asked, turning to look at her as she focused on the road. "Yes, and I believed him. And all this time, I was sending him money because he told me you were struggling with debt, that creditors were after you," Mrs. Walker explained, her voice tinged with hurt. I shook my head, feeling the weight of missed connections. "That's not true. He told me you were sick, and that you didn't want anything to do with me. He said visiting would stress you out. He's been lying to both of us, playing us against each other." We drove in silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts, until we reached the cemetery. It looked exactly like you'd expect a place of mourning to look, somber, quiet, with people dressed in black milling about. We parked a little distance away, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves. As we approached, we stayed on the fringes, close enough to hear, but far enough to remain unnoticed. I spotted David, standing beside a grave with a group of people I didn't recognize. They were all consoling him. Curious and cautious, we edged closer to some of the attendees who looked less involved. Mrs. Walker nudged me, and I cleared my throat before speaking to a somber-faced woman standing nearby. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry for your loss. We just heard and came as soon as we could. May I ask who passed away?" I kept my voice low, respectful. The woman looked at us with sad eyes. "Oh, thank you. It's my niece, poor thing. She fought long and hard against her illness. A year of marriage and now this tragedy." My heart stuttered. "Your niece was married too?" She nodded toward David. "Yes, to that young man there. They were so in love. Heartbreaking." The pieces clicked, each one a betrayal. I felt Mrs. Walker stiffen beside me, her breath catching. "He's been living a double life," I said, the words tasting foul in my mouth. Mrs. Walker covered her face with her hands briefly, before looking at me, her eyes fierce. "We can't let him get away with this. Not only has he lied and cheated, but he's also played us for fools. Let the funeral end, see where he goes, who he talks to." So, we waited, hidden in plain sight among the mourners, watching as David played the grieving husband. It was a performance worthy of an award, and under different circumstances, I might have applauded the sheer audacity of his deceit. After the funeral, Mrs. Walker and I slipped into her car, keeping a low profile as we trailed behind David and the grieving parents of the woman he claimed to love. They drove to a large, beautiful house, its door standing open. We parked a bit away and walked up quietly, unnoticed in the chaos of guests and condolences. Stepping into the house, the murmur of voices from the living room guided us. We hovered just out of sight, catching the tail end of a conversation that made my blood run cold. "He's like a son to us now," the deceased woman's father was saying, his voice thick with emotion. "And we've decided, in light of our daughter's passing, to leave him everything, the house, our business." It's what she would have wanted. David's response was choked, a sob breaking through. "Thank you. I've lost my parents years ago, and having a family again means everything to me." Suddenly, Mrs. Walker couldn't contain herself any longer. She burst into the room, her voice a sharp crack in the solemn atmosphere. "When exactly did I die, David?" The room fell silent, all eyes snapping to where we stood. David's face went from grief-stricken to ghostly pale, his eyes wide with shock. I followed Mrs. Walker in, my own anger bubbling over. "Yeah, David, what's going on? How could you marry again? Did you forget you already have a wife?" The parents of the deceased woman looked from me to David, confusion turning to horror. "What is she talking about, David? Married? To her?" David stammered, his earlier composure crumbling under the weight of his lies. It's not like that. I can explain." "Explain? Explain how you've been lying to us all this time?" The father's voice boomed, his initial kindness curdling into fury. David's desperation was palpable as he turned to the parents. "Please, you have to understand, I was going to fix everything. Mrs. Walker snorted, disbelief and anger etching her features. By faking your mother's death? By marrying another woman while your wife is still around? David looked at me then, his eyes pleading. Anna, I'm sorry. I got into some trouble, some really bad debts with dangerous people. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. The deceased woman's mother finally found her voice, her grief morphing into outrage. Get out of our house. We will be calling our lawyers. You will give back every single penny. On the front lawn, as David was escorted out by the father, Mrs. Walker turned to him, her voice cutting through the crisp air. I don't ever want to see you again. You are no son of mine. David collapsed to his knees on the pavement, crying out, Please, don't leave me like this. They'll kill me. I just need a chance to make things right. I watched, numb, as he reached for us, his tears leaving trails on his cheeks. But there was nothing left to say. I turned away, the final shred of any affection I might have had for him withering in the harsh light of his deceit. The morning after David's deception unraveled before the world, I was sitting across from my lawyer, a steely-eyed woman named Sharon who had come highly recommended. So, you're telling me he forged my signature on divorce papers? I asked, still grappling with the breadth of David's betrayal. Sharon nodded, her lips a thin line. Exactly. And it was this forgery that allowed him to marry again legally. We've got a clear case for fraud. By the afternoon, I was at the police station, recounting everything to a sympathetic officer who promised they'd take it seriously. True to their word, the wheels of justice spun faster than I'd expected. David was conditionally convicted of document forgery within weeks. During this whirlwind, I also demanded financial restitution for the years I'd unwittingly supported his double life. Between my claims and the lawsuit filed by the parents of his second, late wife, David's facade of a successful, if secretive, life crumbled spectacularly. He did pay, both financially and morally. With his assets liquidated to cover the settlements and his reputation in tatters, David fled the country, chased by the debt still snapping at his heels. With the money I received, I poured my energy into expanding my cosmetology office. New equipment, a fresh coat of paint, and 2 new hires later, it felt like I was finally rebuilding from the ruins David had left behind. In the midst of the chaos, a new, unexpected chapter of my life began. I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a whirlwind of emotions, fear and joy inextricably linked. But when Mrs. Walker heard, her reaction was nothing but supportive. Anna, this is wonderful news. Say you'll let me help, let me be a part of this child's life. Heaven knows, after everything with David, I need something good to focus on. She assured me over the phone, her voice warm and unwavering. Mrs. Walker not only supported me but went so far as to include me and my future child in her will, making us her sole heirs. It was more than I could have ever expected, and it solidified our bond, forged not by blood but by shared trials. We often spent afternoons together, planning for the future, discussing how we'd decorate the nursery, and talking about what we'd teach the little one. The betrayal that had brought so much pain had also brought unexpected gifts, and I found solace in that silver lining. I had been running around all day, making sure everything was perfect for the charity event. The football team I managed was hosting, and it was crucial everything went smoothly. By the time the guests started pouring in, I was already exhausted but had to keep the smile plastered on. I was checking the auction items when I first saw him. John was hard to miss. He was handing out programs at the door, his smile genuine and reaching his eyes. I figured he was just another volunteer, but something about him caught my attention. Need a hand with those? His voice was warm as he approached me by the auction table. I looked up, a bit startled. Oh, thanks, but I think I've got it under control, I said, stacking the last of the brochures. Sure looks like it, he chuckled, glancing around at the well-organized venue. John, he extended his hand, which I shook, feeling his firm grip. Emily, I introduced myself, trying to ignore the little spark that shot through me at the contact. So, Emily, you run this whole operation? His eyebrows shot up, clearly impressed. Yeah, I manage the team and organize these events. It's a lot, but I love it. John nodded, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on me. Looks like you do a great job. It's nice seeing so much support for a good cause. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about the event, the team, and somehow drifted into more personal territories like our favorite movies and books. It was refreshing to talk to someone who was genuinely interested in what I had to say. So, you volunteer often? I asked, sipping my drink as we leaned against a high table. Whenever I can. My buddy dragged me here, but I'm glad he did. John's smile was infectious, and I found myself grinning back. Dragged? Really, that's the story you're going with? I teased, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, a sound that was hearty and sincere. Okay, maybe not exactly dragged. I wanted to come. And I'm glad I did, meeting you is a bonus. As the night wore on, I realized I was enjoying myself more than I had at any previous event. It wasn't just the success of the evening, it was John. He was easy to talk to, didn't put on airs, and didn't shy away from showing his interest. His down-to-earth nature was a breath of fresh air in the usual snooty crowds I mingled with. Hey, before this night ends, can I see you again? John's question caught me a bit off guard, not by the content but by the earnestness in his voice. I'd like that, I admitted, my usual guarded self taking a back seat. Great, it's a date then, he said with a confident nod, his smile wide. As I watched him mingle with other guests, thanking them for their contributions, I couldn't help but feel like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something special. The drive over to John's parents' place was quiet, too quiet. I kept fidgeting with the hem of my skirt, my stomach in knots. John noticed, of course, and reached over to give my hand a reassuring squeeze. It's gonna be fine, Em. They're gonna love you, he said with a smile, but I could tell he was a bit nervous too. As we pulled into the driveway of a tidy suburban home, my anxiety ramped up. John's mom, Martha, and his sister, Karen, were already waiting at the door as we walked up. Their smiles were tight, almost forced. John, and you must be Emily, Martha said, her voice sweet but her eyes scanning me like a hawk. She offered a cheek kiss that barely touched my cheek. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Smith, I managed to say, trying to sound confident. Please, call me Martha. And this is Karen. She gestured to a woman who looked a lot like John, but with sharper edges. Karen's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she shook my hand. Heard a lot about you, Emily. John can't stop talking. The inside of the house was as neat as the exterior, every piece of furniture and decor perfectly in place. We sat down in the living room, and the small talk started, the kind that pricked at you under the surface. So, Emily, John tells us you manage a football team? That's an interesting choice for a career, Martha said, her tone dripping with something that sounded like disapproval. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of her judgment. Yes, I love sports, and it's a fulfilling job. The team is like a family. A family of big, burly men, Karen chimed in, her words sharp. Must be tough, keeping them all in line. I laughed, a bit uneasy. They're not that hard to manage, really. We respect each other a lot. Dinner was served shortly after, and the atmosphere didn't get any lighter. Every question felt like a test, every answer I gave scrutinized. Martha passed the salad. I suppose in your line of work, you don't get much time for finer pursuits? Reading, art? I find time, I said, keeping my tone light. I love reading. And I do enjoy art when I can. Karen snorted softly. What's your favorite book then? I mentioned a recent bestseller, a thriller I'd actually enjoyed quite a bit. Ah, light reading, Karen dismissed it quickly. I prefer classics myself. More depth, you know? I nodded, feeling out of my depth. The meal continued with more of these little jabs, veiled in politeness, but sharp enough to sting. John tried to change the subject a few times, bringing up neutral topics like movies and vacation plans, but the tension hovered like a cloud over the table. After dinner, John and I helped clear the table, and he whispered, "You okay?" "Yeah, just didn't realize it would be an interrogation," I whispered back, trying to smile. We said our goodbyes soon after, Martha's farewell as cool as her welcome. "Lovely to meet you, Emily. We must do this again soon," she said, her smile tight. As John and I walked back to the car, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the evening was over, and frustration that it hadn't gone as I'd hoped. Wedding planning was supposed to be fun, or so I thought. But every decision felt like walking through a minefield with John's mom and his sister having an opinion on everything. From the color of the napkins to the seating arrangements, nothing escaped their scrutiny. "Really, Emily, chartreuse for the bridesmaids? It's such a vibrant choice," Martha had said one afternoon, eyeing my color swatches like they were toxic waste. I tried to keep my cool, clenching my fists under the table. "John likes it. It's lively, don't you think?" Karen had snorted, flipping through a bridal magazine. "If you're aiming for lively, sure. Most would prefer classy, though." Their comments were like little jabs, constant and stinging. John did his best to back me up, but there were moments I saw him caught in the middle, trying to please everyone. As the big day drew closer, the remarks didn't let up. We were at the final tasting for the wedding menu when Martha brought up the guest list again. "So, Emily, you've really invited your entire team? All those men?" Her tone was as smooth as silk, but the implication was clear. "Yeah, they're a big part of my life," I replied, trying not to let her see she was getting to me. "They're looking forward to celebrating with us." Karen chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. "Isn't that a bit inappropriate?" "I mean, it's your day, but you know, appearances and all." I bit back a sharper retort, settling for, "They're just friends, Karen. John knows them well." John jumped in then, his voice firm. "Emily's right. They're great guys. Let's focus on the food, huh? How's the chicken?" He was trying, I'd give him that. The wedding day itself was a blur of smiles, dances, and thankfully, minimal drama. Martha managed to keep her comments to a minimum, and Karen was too busy judging the flower arrangements to stir up much trouble. At the reception, though, after a few glasses of champagne, Karen found me alone by the bar. "Emily, just a heads up, Mom and I will be keeping an eye on things, you know, after the wedding." Her words slurred slightly, but her sharp gaze told me she was sober enough to mean what she said. I frowned, turning to face her fully. "What's that supposed to mean, Karen?" "Just that, we care about John. A lot. We're here to protect him, from whatever might come." She patted my hand in a patronizing way that made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and decided to let it go for the night. For John's sake, I plastered on a smile and rejoined the party. The rest of the evening went off without a hitch, and John and I slipped away, finally married and ready to start our life together. As we drove off to our honeymoon, his hand in mine, I felt a mix of joy and apprehension. The wedding was over, but something told me the real challenges were just beginning. The news hit like a wave when I found out I was pregnant. Overjoyed, I couldn't wait to tell John. We'd been talking about starting a family, and this felt like the perfect next chapter for us. John's reaction was everything I hoped for. His eyes lit up, and he lifted me off the ground in a bear hug right in the middle of our kitchen. "We're gonna have a baby," he exclaimed, laughter and tears mixing on his face. It was a moment of pure happiness, one I wanted to bottle up and keep forever. But then came the hard part, telling his family. Given the cold shoulder I'd gotten so far, I was nervous. We decided to break the news at a family dinner that Sunday. As we drove over, John squeezed my hand, trying to be reassuring. "Whatever happens, we're in this together, right?" he said, glancing over at me with a smile. "Right," I nodded, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. Dinner was already tense when we arrived. Martha was her usual self, controlling the conversation, while Karen seemed on edge, barely acknowledging my presence. When dessert was served, John decided it was now or never. So, we have some news, he began, his voice steady but filled with excitement. Martha and Karen turned their full attention to us, forks paused midair. We're expecting a baby, I said, managing a smile despite the anxiety. Martha's reaction was hard to read at first. She just sat there, blinking, before forcing a smile. Well, that's wonderful news, she said, her voice a bit too high-pitched. Karen, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding her feelings. A baby, huh? You sure it's John's? Her words cut through the air, sharp and cold. John's face turned red, and he slammed his hand on the table. Karen, what the hell? I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to speak. Yes, I'm sure. Why would you even say that? Karen shrugged, looking from me to John with a smirk. Well, you work with a lot of men, Emily. It's a fair question. That's out of line, Karen. Totally out of line. John shot back, his tone harsh. Martha intervened then, her voice soothing but with an undercurrent of steel. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. We're just surprised, that's all. Right, Karen? Karen muttered something under her breath and pushed her chair back. I need some air, she announced before stalking off. The rest of the evening went downhill. We left soon after Karen's exit, the car ride home filled with silence and unsaid words. I could tell John was furious and embarrassed, and I didn't know how to comfort him without stirring up more anger. John, I'm sorry about that, I finally said as we neared our house. It's not your fault, Em. It's Karen. She's out of line. We'll handle it, he replied, his grip on the steering wheel tight. As we pulled into our driveway, I couldn't shake off Karen's words or the look in her eye. It was clear she was brewing up a storm, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. Her question about the baby's paternity was more than just a jab, it was a declaration of war. The weeks following the dinner were a mixed bag. Work kept me busy, and my pregnancy was progressing well, but the tension with John's family, especially Karen, was always lurking in the background. One particularly grueling day at the office, I was wrapping up late. Most of my team had already headed out, and I was looking forward to getting home and putting my feet up. That's when Mike, one of my coaches, popped his head back in the door. Hey, Emily, you heading out soon? I can give you a lift if you need, my route's past your place today. I hesitated for a moment, aware of Karen's insinuations, but then reality kicked in. It was just a ride. Sure, thanks, Mike. I'm just about done here. As we walked to his car, I was grateful for the company. Mike was always easy to talk to, and I needed to unwind after a long day. We chatted about the usual, team stuff, upcoming games, nothing personal. When he dropped me off, I thanked him and thought nothing more of it. That evening, John came home looking stormier than I'd seen him in a long time. He stormed into the kitchen, where I was starting on dinner, and slammed his keys on the counter. Emily, we need to talk, he said, his voice tight. I turned off the stove, my heart sinking. What's wrong, John? He pulled out his phone, showing me a video. It was me, getting into Mike's car. Karen sent me this. She's making claims, Em, about you and Mike. She's saying. I felt sick. The video was harmless, but with Karen's spin, I could imagine what she was suggesting. John, it's nothing. He just gave me a ride home because it was on his way. John ran his hands through his hair, clearly trying to calm himself. I know. It's just, her constant digging and poking. It's just hard, you know? Having my sister turn against my wife like this. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. Karen had escalated her campaign against me by calling our office anonymously, spreading rumors about my inappropriate relationships with the team. My boss pulled me aside, concerned. Emily, you know I don't usually pay attention to gossip, but these calls, they're quite specific. Is everything all right? I reassured him, angry and embarrassed, that Karen's lies had reached my workplace. Everything's fine, really. Just some family drama spilling over. I'm sorry it's gotten this far. He nodded, understanding but clearly uncomfortable. All right, just handle it, okay? We can't have this affecting the team. After Karen's anonymous calls, the atmosphere at work changed. It wasn't just the whispers, it was the looks. People I'd worked with for years, who joked around and shared coffee breaks with me, now hesitated, their eyes flicking away too quickly when I caught them staring. I walked into the locker room one day to grab some files when I overheard a couple of the newer team members whispering. Just weird, isn't it? Wonder if it's true what they say about her. One of them muttered, not noticing my approach. I cleared my throat, and they both spun around, their faces going red. If you have something to ask me, do it to my face. Not behind my back, I said, my voice colder than I intended. The taller one, a rookie named Tom, stuttered out an apology. Sorry, Emily. It's just the rumors and all. What, that I'm having affairs with half the team? I snatched the files I came for, slamming the cabinet a little harder than necessary. It's crap, and you do well to remember that. I left them standing there, probably more scared of me now than of any tabloid trash they heard. This was what Karen wanted, to make me doubt myself, to isolate me. I wasn't going to let her win. Back in my office, I tried to focus on the game strategies for the upcoming weekend. But my phone buzzed nonstop, texts from John asking if I was okay, calls from unknown numbers that I started ignoring. The weight of the situation was suffocating. Later, Mike knocked and came in, closing the door softly behind him. He looked serious, which was a departure from his usual easygoing self. Emily, you all right? This talk going around, it's garbage, you know that, right? His concern was genuine, and for a second, I felt my composure waver. I know, Mike. Thanks, I managed, mustering a weak smile. It's just hard, you know? To be questioned like this, about my professional conduct, because of some family feud. Mike nodded, leaning against the desk. People talk, but they'll see it for what it is eventually. You've built up too much goodwill here for this to stick. I appreciated his words, and after he left, I felt a little better. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe the team would see through the nonsense after all. But the day wasn't over yet. As I was leaving, one of the administrative staff, Sarah, caught up with me at my car. She looked nervous, clutching a bunch of papers to her chest. Emily, I didn't know who else to tell. There's been more calls. Not just to the office, but to some of the sponsors. I felt a chill run down my spine. What exactly did they say, Sarah? She shuffled the papers, pulling out a couple with scribbled notes. Mostly insinuations. That you're not representing the team well, that your personal life might be a risk to our reputation. It's nonsense, but some of the sponsors are getting antsy. I took the papers from her, my hands shaking slightly. Thanks for telling me, Sarah. I'll handle it. Driving home, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. How could I fight this? Karen's venom was spreading, poisoning everything I cared about. We decided to host a big celebration for the birth of our son, inviting both families to share in our joy. It was supposed to be a day of laughter and love, a chance to bring everyone closer and perhaps mend some fences. The house was filled with the sound of cheerful chatter and the sweet aroma of baked goods. As the party was in full swing, Karen arrived, her expression unreadable. She held an envelope in her hand, which she clutched a little too tightly. The mood shifted when she walked straight up to me, handing me the envelope with a tight smile. Happy holidays, Emily, Karen said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness as she slid the envelope across the table toward me. What's this? I asked, not touching the envelope, feeling John's grip tighten. A little gift. For peace of mind, Karen replied, her eyes glinting with malice. I glanced at John, who nodded slightly, and I steeled myself before opening the envelope. Inside was a paternity test voucher. My heart sank, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. You serious right now, Karen? John's voice was low, dangerous. Why not prove it, Emily? If you're so sure, Karen taunted, leaning back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of the family. Then, something in me snapped. I was done being the victim in Karen's twisted little game. You want a test, Karen? Fine. Let's do it. Let's clear the air once and for all, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. John was staring at Karen, his expression hard. And when it shows that I'm the father, Karen, I want you to stop this. Stop all your crap. Karen shrugged, looking around at the family members who were whispering among themselves. Sure, when it shows John as the father. The next week was a whirlwind of doctor's appointments and waiting. When the results came back, John and I opened them together. No surprise, John was indeed the father. We called another family meeting, this time at our home. Karen and Martha arrived, looking slightly apprehensive. I handed them the test results without a word. Karen opened the envelope and read the results. The color drained from her face as she realized what it meant. Martha read over her shoulder, her expression crumbling into one of embarrassment. John took a deep breath before he spoke, his disappointment palpable. This needs to stop, Karen. Mom, I can't believe you supported this. We're supposed to be family. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken regrets. Martha looked at me, then at John, and finally at the floor. I'm sorry, Emily. We were wrong. Karen was silent, her usual bravado gone. She muttered a low apology before avoiding my gaze. As they left, the relief was palpable. Although the air had cleared somewhat, the wounds were deep. It would take time to heal, if at all. But as John and I looked at our son, sleeping peacefully in his crib, we knew we'd weather any storm for him. After the paternity test fiasco settled, I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of injustice. Despite proving Karen wrong, the sting of her accusations still burned bright. The whole ordeal had sparked a flame of revenge in me that I hadn't known I possessed. Karen's birthday was just around the corner, and an idea began to form in my mind, a plan to give her a taste of her own medicine. The day of Karen's birthday arrived, and the family gathered at John's parents' house for the celebration. Everyone was in high spirits, chattering and laughing, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I had managed to keep my plan a secret, even from John, who I knew would disapprove of any kind of retaliation. As Karen opened her gifts, laughing and thanking everyone, I felt my heart pound in my chest. It was now or never. I approached her with a serene smile, the same DNA test certificate in hand that she had so callously gifted me months ago. Happy birthday, Karen, I said, my voice calm as I handed her the envelope. I thought you might appreciate this little gift, just as I did. Karen's face dropped as she took the envelope, confusion turning to apprehension. What's this? She asked, her voice a tremble. A paternity test, I replied coolly. After all, if you have nothing to hide, there's no harm, right? The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on Karen, then on me. Martha looked from me to her daughter, clearly shocked. Karen hesitated, her face pale, then laughed nervously. You're joking, right, Emily? No joke, Karen. Fair is fair, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Under the weight of the family's expectant looks, Karen finally agreed. The test was done the following week, and we all awaited the results. When they came back, they revealed the shocking truth: Paul was not the father of Karen's children. The news broke during another family gathering, and chaos ensued. How could you, Karen? Martha's voice was filled with disbelief and anger. Paul, silent until then, stood up, his face hard with betrayal. Who is he, Karen? Who? Before Karen could respond, I played my final card. I pulled out my phone and showed them a video of Karen kissing an unknown man passionately at the stadium, a man who was later identified as Paul's best friend. It's not what it looks like, Karen yelled, desperation creeping into her voice as she turned to face the family, who watched in stunned silence. Emily set this up. She's trying to ruin me. I did nothing but uncover the truth, Karen. The same truth you were so keen to find in my life, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I explained that I had hired a private investigator after her relentless accusations. What he found was years of deceit on Karen's part. The revelation shattered the family. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and in the end, Paul and Karen's marriage crumbled under the weight of her infidelities. Karen tried to blame me for everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the aftermath, John and I decided it was best to distance ourselves from the drama. We focused on our own family, our little boy who was growing up so fast. Occasionally, we would hear snippets of Karen's tumultuous life, but we chose to stay out of it. Instead, we treasured every moment with our son, building a world around him filled with love and devoid of chaos. Sitting on our porch one evening, John wrapped his arm around me, a soft sigh escaping him. You know, in the end, I think we did the right thing. For us, for him. I nodded, leaning into his embrace. We did, John. We really did. No matter what came our way, we faced it together. That's what family does. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a profound sense of contentment. We had faced challenges, but we had faced them together, and that made all the difference. Our future, bright and promising, was all that mattered now. So, there I was, standing outside the quaint little coffee shop where Clara had decided to play Cupid. Clara's been my go-to gal since high school, always into stars and numbers and all that jazz. Me? I've always kept my feet on the ground. But here I was, ready to meet Mr. Perfect Match according to her numerology charts. I spotted Clara waving frantically from inside. Pushing through the door, the bell jingled loudly, drawing a few glances. There you are, Elle. I was starting to think you'd chickened out, Clara teased as I made my way over. Chickened out? Me? Never, I scoffed, rolling my eyes but smiling. But remind me again why I let you talk me into these things. Clara's eyes sparkled with mischief. Because deep down, you know I'm right. Plus, you've gotta admit, your dating pool has been more like a dating puddle lately. Harsh, Clara. Really harsh, I said, but I couldn't help laughing. That was Clara for you, no filter, but usually right. Just then, a guy walked in, tall, dark hair, easy smile. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and made you want to smile back, even if you were trying to stay cool. Ah, that's him, Clara whispered, giving me a nudge. Mark, over here. Mark turned our way and walked over. He had a confident stride, but not too cocky, which was good. We shook hands, and his grip was just right, not too firm, not too weak. Nice to meet you, Elsie. Clara's told me a lot about you, he said, his voice warm. We ordered our coffees, and I went for my usual, black, no sugar. Mark went for the same, and Clara teased. Look at you two, already a perfect match. As we settled into our seats, the initial awkwardness melted away surprisingly quickly. Mark was easy to talk to. He didn't just talk about himself either, he asked about my work as a video editor, genuinely interested in the details. So, you edit videos? That sounds cool. Bet you've seen all sorts of crazy footage, Mark said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. You have no idea, I laughed. From wedding bloopers to failed YouTube stunts, I've seen it all. What about you? Clara mentioned something about engineering? Yeah, I work with a small firm downtown. We handle all sorts of projects, from bridges to buildings. Keeps me on my toes, he explained. The conversation flowed from work to movies to our shared guilty pleasure of bad reality TV. It felt like talking to an old friend rather than a guy I just met. As the evening wound down, Mark said, I had a great time tonight, Elsie. Maybe we can do this again? Just the two of us? I hesitated for a split second, old habits die hard, but nodded. I'd like that. We exchanged numbers, and as I walked home later, I couldn't help but think maybe Clara's numerology wasn't all nonsense. Mark really did seem like a great guy. but only time would tell. For now, I'd just enjoy the flutter in my stomach that I hadn't felt in a long time. When I moved in with Mark, everything felt like it was falling into place. He had this old house, a bit of a fixer-upper, but it had charm. We started talking about making it our forever home, and that's when the whole money talk came up. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and we were lounging on the couch with cups of coffee, going over some bills and future plans. "Elle, you know how I've got that mortgage hanging over me, right?" Mark started, a bit hesitant. "I've been thinking, maybe we could use some of your savings to pay it off. It would be a load off, and we could start fresh, you know?" I took a sip of my coffee, buying some time. My savings weren't just rainy day money, it was the inheritance from my grandma, meant to be something special, something she saved for me. "Mark, that's a lot of cash. We talking about all of it?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Not all, no. Just the mortgage part. We'd still have plenty left for the house and maybe some extras," he said quickly, like he'd rehearsed it. I set my coffee down and turned to face him. "Look, I get where you're coming from, but that's big money. And it was meant for my future, you know?" Mark nodded, reaching for my hand. "I know, Elle, and this is our future, right? Together? Paying off that mortgage would mean less stress about finances. We could even start talking about renovations or a new car." I pulled back a little, thinking it over. It wasn't just money, it was security, my security, and Grandma's wish. But then, wasn't a happy, stress-free home with Mark worth it? "Okay, suppose we do this, clear your mortgage. What's next? We're just going to jump into renovations?" I asked, feeling the weight of the decision. "Yeah, think about it. We could redo the kitchen, maybe knock out that wall to open up the living room. Make it really ours," he said, his eyes lighting up with every word. "And furniture? We gonna spruce up that too?" I was warming up to the idea, picturing the house transforming with us. "Absolutely. New couch, dining set, maybe even that patio set you were eyeing last week," Mark replied, squeezing my hand. So, we did it. Paid off his mortgage and started planning the renovations. The next few months were a whirlwind of contractors and paint samples. The house was turning into what we'd imagined, and it felt good, mostly. There were moments, late at night, when I'd wonder if I'd put too much into this, too soon. But then I'd see Mark, all excited about picking out fixtures or tiles, and I'd tell myself it was right. The phone call that shook our newly renovated home came late one evening. Mark's phone lit up, buzzing insistently on the kitchen counter. The look on his face when he picked up told me it wasn't good news. "Mom? Slow down, what's happened?" Mark paced the length of our kitchen. I could only catch bits and pieces, but enough to piece together the emergency: his dad had a stroke. Okay, we're coming. Just hang tight." Mark ended the call and turned to me, his face pale. "It's Dad, he's had a stroke. We need to go, Elle." Packing a bag in a whirl, we drove through the night to his parents' place in the next city over. We arrived to find Mark's mom, Linda, a small, wiry woman with more nerves than calm. She was fretting in the doorway as we pulled up. "Mark, thank God you're here," she said, pulling him into a tight hug. Then her eyes landed on me. "Elsie, you too." Inside, the house was dim, the air thick with tension. Linda led us straight to where Mark's dad, Joe, lay in bed, his left side immobile, his face drawn. "Dad, it's me, Mark. We're here now," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. Joe's right hand twitched, his eyes showing a flicker of recognition. Linda hovered by the bed, wringing her hands. "He can't speak. The doctors, they don't know if he'll recover fully." "What are we looking at here, Linda? Does he need rehab? A nurse?" I asked, feeling out of my depth but needing to know the plan. Linda shook her head, a stubborn set to her mouth. "No, he stays here. He wouldn't want to be anywhere else." "But Linda, think about professional care. He needs specialists. I pushed gently, knowing she was scared but also aware of what was at stake. "No, Elsie. We can't afford that, and this is his home. He stays," Linda snapped, her tone final. At a family dinner that night, the air was tense as Mark and Linda laid out their expectations. Mark took a deep breath. I have to head back for work, but Mom needs help here with Dad. You've seen how hard it is for her." Linda nodded, her gaze fixed on me. "Yes, Elsie, please. I can't manage on my own with my sciatica acting up. It means so much to us." I felt the weight of their gaze, the desperation in Linda's voice. Mark was looking at me too, his eyes pleading. I knew what my answer would be before I even said it out loud. After Mark left, the reality set in. It was just me and Linda, and mostly just me, taking care of Joe. Linda's bouts of sciatica left her bedridden many days, and I was running the house, managing medications, and trying to keep up with my own work remotely. The days were turning into a blur of endless tasks and mounting frustrations. Linda, blaming everything on her own health issues, didn't lift a finger around the house. Worse, she had a knack for making me feel like nothing I did was ever enough. "Elsie, are you going to sit at that computer all day?" Linda's voice would slice through the quiet of the house like a knife. I was hunched over my laptop, trying to meet a video editing deadline, the stress evident in my tightly furrowed brow. "I'm working, Linda. This is my job," I'd respond, my voice strained but calm, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. "It doesn't look like much work to me," she'd scoff, shuffling off with an air of disapproval. I bit back the sharper retorts teetering on the tip of my tongue. After all, she was family, and family meant biting your tongue until it bled, right? But it was hard, especially when I felt more like a maid than a daughter-in-law. Each day, I cooked, cleaned, and cared for Joe, my father-in-law, who still hadn't regained his ability to speak. His eyes, full of gratitude and apology, often met mine, offering silent thanks that Linda never voiced. During one of my increasingly rare calls with Mark, I tried to explain how strained things had become. "Mark, it's tough here. Your mom, she's really hard on me. And your dad needs more care than I can manage on top of everything else," I confided, the weight of my exhaustion evident in my voice. "I know it's hard, Elle. Just hang in there a bit longer, okay? Dad will get better, and once he's up on his feet, you can come back home," Mark pleaded. Determined to do more for Joe, I completed a course in massage therapy tailored for stroke recovery. Each evening, after the dinner dishes were cleared and Linda had retired to her room with a grunt, I'd help Joe into a comfortable chair and gently work his stiff muscles. Things took a surprising turn when Linda announced she was feeling better and wanted to visit Mark. "I think I'll go stay with your husband for a few months, see the city," she declared one morning out of the blue. Her news should have filled me with dread at the thought of being alone, but instead, a wave of relief washed over me. When she left, the house felt lighter, as if her departure had lifted a heavy veil that had been smothering me. Finally alone, I established a new routine. Mornings were for Joe. We developed a silent camaraderie, communicating through gestures and shared smiles. I'd massage his limbs, encouraging movement, and his improvement, however slight, felt like victories in a war I'd thought we were losing. Afternoons and evenings were mine again. I reclaimed my time and dove back into my video editing with renewed vigor. Without Linda's constant nagging, I found my productivity soaring. I'd work late into the night, the glow of my laptop a beacon of normalcy in the otherwise turned upside-down world. Evenings were the hardest. I'd sit in the quiet after dinner, missing Mark, missing my old life, but also appreciating the peace. "I think we're doing okay, Joe," I'd say as we settled in after our dinner, speaking more to fill the silence than out of necessity. Joe would nod, his eyes crinkling in agreement or perhaps gratitude. Half a year had rolled around, and it was amazing to see how much Joe had improved. He was not only talking, but had also started getting around with a new wheelchair I helped pick out for him. It was a game changer. He even began doing things for himself, like making his own snacks and managing his medication, which seriously lightened my load. During this time, Joe and I had grown incredibly close, so much that he started calling me his daughter, which warmed my heart every time he said it. It wasn't just about care anymore, it was about family, about the bond we had formed. One lazy afternoon, we were both in the living room, Joe in his wheelchair, flipping through channels, and me with my laptop, trying to catch up on emails. A thought had been nagging at me for a while, and seeing him so active and independent brought it to the forefront. "Joe, can I ask you something?" I began, hesitating a bit as I closed my laptop. "Of course, kiddo. What's on your mind?" Joe looked over, his face open and inviting. "Well, I was wondering, why didn't you ever consider going to a nursing home or maybe even short-term care at the hospital? It might have made your recovery easier," I said, genuinely curious. Joe looked genuinely surprised. "A nursing home?" I thought about it. Actually, I wouldn't have minded that at all. I've even got some money saved up just in case I needed to go to a better place than what the basic insurance covers. I frowned, confused. "Really? Linda told me you were completely against it, that you wanted to stay here no matter what. She said there was no extra money for anything else." Joe's face hardened slightly. "That's not true, Elsie. I never said I wanted to stay here no matter what. And the money, it's there. I guess she didn't want me using it on a nursing home." That conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. It seemed there were decisions being made without Joe's input, which didn't sit right with me. But before I could dig deeper, my work pulled me back in. I'd landed a major video editing project that demanded almost all my attention. It was a big break for me, a chance to really make a name for myself in the industry. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Joe was doing well, my career was on an upswing, but there was a void where Mark used to be. His visits had become non-existent, and his calls were brief and distracted. "Busy at work" was always his excuse. As Joe's health stopped causing concern, I thought it was time to mend things at home too. With a heart full of hopeful anticipation, I packed up some of my things, hugged Joe goodbye, and headed back to the house that Mark and I had turned into a home. It was late evening when I arrived, the neighborhood cloaked in darkness, the familiar glow of our porch light a beacon in the night. But something was off. As I approached the front door, my key wouldn't fit into the lock. Confused and slightly anxious, I rang the doorbell. After a few tense moments, the door swung open, revealing a woman I'd never seen before. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing me suspiciously. I live here with my husband. Who are you?" My voice trembled, a mix of confusion and growing dread setting in. "I'm just watching the house for the new owner," she responded, her tone cautious yet firm. "New owner? There must be some mistake. This is my house," I said, the firmness in my voice belying the shock that was starting to take hold. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the house has been sold. Maybe you should call your husband or something," she suggested before she started to close the door. Panic rising, I stepped back, pulling out my phone to call Mark. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped it twice. When he finally answered, his voice was cold, detached. "Mark, what's going on? Why is there someone else in our house?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the strain. "Elsie, I sold the house. We needed to move on. I bought a new place with my mom. There's no room for you there," he said, his words like ice shards piercing through me. "But all the money I put into that house, our house. How could you sell it without even telling me?" I could barely keep the desperation out of my voice. Mark laughed, a sound so chilling it echoed in my ears. "You think you can prove any of that? Good luck, Elsie. Are you divorcing me?" My voice was a whisper, barely audible even to my own ears. "The papers are on their way to Dad's. You can sign them and send them back," Mark said flatly. "Mark, please, what about your dad? What about Joe?" I pressed, desperate for some semblance of sanity in this madness. "He's no longer my concern. Mom's got the will in her favor now. We don't need you, or him. Why don't you take care of him if you're so concerned?" His tone was dismissive, as if discarding not just his father but our entire life together. The line went dead, the finality of the tone signaling the end of everything we had built. I stood there in the dark, alone, the cold night air wrapping around me like a shroud. The woman in the house turned off the porch light, and suddenly the beacon that had always signified home was gone, leaving me in darkness. I stumbled back to my car, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal, pain, and disbelief. The drive back to Joe's was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to piece together the shattered remnants of my life. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? Steeling myself, I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. It opened before I could knock, Joe looking up from his wheelchair, his expression worried. "Oh, Joe, it's all gone. The house, Mark, he's left us with nothing." Joe took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "Elsie, I've known about their scheming for a while now," he began, his voice grave but steady. "After my stroke, when I couldn't speak or move, I heard them. Linda and Mark, plotting right in front of me." I stared at him, aghast. "What? You knew?" My voice cracked under the strain of my emotions. Joe nodded slowly. "Yes, I heard them planning to sell the house out from under you. And worse, they planned to dump me in some cheap care facility once they cashed in on my assets." I felt a cold fury building inside me, replacing the despair. How could they be so cruel? To you, to me? I struggled to wrap my head around the depth of their deceit. Joe's face hardened. "They're only after the money, Elsie. That's all they've ever cared about." He paused, taking a moment before he reached into the pocket of his cardigan. Pulling out a set of keys, he placed them in my hand. "But I've made moves of my own. I bought the house back, secretly. It's yours now, Elsie. I want you to have it." Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief mixed with a fierce determination. "Joe, thank you. I don't know what to say." The very next day, we met with Joe's lawyer, a seasoned man with a no-nonsense attitude named Mr. Gibson. In his office, filled with legal books and papers, Joe made it clear he wanted to change his will. "I want everything to go to Elsie. She's the daughter I should have had," Joe declared, his voice unwavering. Mr. Gibson nodded, taking notes. "I'll prepare the new documents. Elsie, you're about to become the sole heir to Joe's estate." Grateful, I simply nodded, overwhelmed by Joe's trust in me. We then tackled the issue of the money I'd invested in Mark's house. Mr. Gibson was methodical. "We'll need to prove your contributions to the mortgage. Bank statements, any receipts you might have, witness statements from the bank officials." Fortunately, I'd kept meticulous records. "I have everything. We can prove every penny I put in," I assured him, pulling out a folder stuffed with documents. "That's good. We'll file for the recovery of your funds. They can't just take what you've rightfully invested," Mr. Gibson said, starting to outline a plan of action. With each step we planned, I felt more empowered, ready to reclaim what was mine and protect Joe from any more harm. When the divorce papers arrived later that week, I signed them without a second thought. I was ready to close that chapter of my life. A week later, Mark and Linda showed up at my doorstep, the house they once called theirs, now indisputably mine. Their faces were the picture of desperation. I had already heard through my lawyer that they were panicking over the lawsuit I planned to file, demanding back the $150,000 I had put into the mortgage. "Elsie, please, we need to talk," Mark began, his voice shaky, avoiding eye contact as if the guilt was too much to bear. Linda chimed in, wringing her hands nervously. "We're so sorry, Elsie. It all got out of hand. Please, can't we just put this behind us?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not moved by their distress. "Sorry? After everything you've done? You think a simple apology will fix it?" "But we're family," Linda tried again, her voice trembling. "That ship sailed the moment you betrayed me and Joe," I replied sharply, the anger in my voice clear and unyielding. Seeing that their pleas were getting them nowhere, I decided to twist the knife a little deeper. "And just so you know, Joe has changed his will. Everything goes to me now. The grin I wore was cruel, sweetened by the justice of it all. Linda's face went pale, and she fainted right there on my new porch. Mark, flustered and embarrassed, had to catch her before she hit the ground. The trial that followed was nothing short of a circus. Mark fought tooth and nail for every cent, refusing to admit that the money I invested was mine. Linda, ever the actress, put on quite a show in court, feigning illness to gain the judge's sympathy. But the evidence was undeniable. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The defendant is ordered to repay $150,000 to the plaintiff. The evidence supports her claim unequivocally. Relief washed over me as justice was served. The gavel's final bang was like music to my ears. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, free from the chains Mark and Linda tried to place on me. Back at home, the house felt more like a sanctuary than ever. Joe and I celebrated quietly, a small toast to new beginnings and to justice. Life settled into a comfortable routine after that. I resumed my video editing work, finding joy in the craft that had always been my passion. Joe was more than just a father-in-law now, he was family, a true friend. News reached us through friends that Mark and Linda had to sell their flashy new apartment to cover the repayment. Now they were living in a rental, much humbler than before. It was a fitting turn of events, though I took no pleasure in their downfall. Just last week, Clara, my numerologist friend, called me up. "Elsie, I found the perfect guy for you. His birth date lines up beautifully with yours." I couldn't help but laugh, a light, free sound that felt good on my lips. "Thanks, Clara, but I think I'm going to stick to meeting people the old-fashioned way. Life's been too crazy for any more predictions." She laughed along with me, and we chatted for a few more minutes about life and love, the conversation light and easy. Hi, I'm Emily. Born to Ava, a once glamorous model, and Jake, a guy who knew his way around a camera, I was supposed to be their golden ticket to keep the lavish lifestyle they were scared of losing. "Look at her, Jake. She's perfect. That face could relaunch my brand," Mom said, hovering over my crib with that calculating gleam in her eyes. I was too young to remember, of course, but she'd repeat that story like a broken record as if proud of her foresight. Dad, a man of few words, snapped photos, turning our home into a studio. "Just one more, Ava. She's tired," he'd often mutter during those endless sessions. "Nonsense. She's a natural, aren't you, baby?" Mom's voice was sugary sweet when she wanted something. It worked on everyone, Dad included. Growing up, I hardly noticed the constant clicks of the camera or Mom's relentless ambition. It was just how things were. My playdates? More like photo ops, with Mom directing every pose. "Smile more, Emily. No, not like that. Think princess, not playground," she'd instruct, eyes darting between me and the lens. I tried to please her. Always tried. Maybe because every flash of the camera was paired with her rare, gleaming approval, or maybe because I didn't know anything else. Dinner time was no different. We didn't talk about school or friends. It was always about branding, shoots, and Mom's new ideas to keep her followers hooked. "Eating healthy is not just good, it's marketable, Emily. Remember, you are what you eat, and right now, you're my little star," Mom explained one evening, her words slow and deliberate as if trying to sell the concept to a potential sponsor hidden in the bushes. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to shrink with each passing day, his voice seldom rising above a whisper. "It's all good, Ava. Maybe we let her have some pizza tonight, eh? A cheat day," he'd suggest on rare occasions, a weak smile fleeting across his face. Her response was always sharp. "And ruin her complexion? You know better than to mess with the routine, Jake." Routine, my constant companion. I knew nothing of lazy Sundays or messy ice cream faces. Everything was curated, my childhood laid out like a magazine spread. One night, I heard them arguing. Their voices, usually hushed around me, echoed through the halls. "She's not just your ticket to fame, Ava. She's our daughter, not some prop," Dad's voice was tinged with frustration. "Oh, grow up, Jake. We're not in some fairy tale. This is real life, and in real life, we capitalize on what we have. Emily is what we have." Mom shot back, her words slicing through any pretense of maternal warmth. I lay in bed, clutching my bear, Mr. Snuggles, trying to make sense of it all. The idea that I was more useful than loved wasn't new, but hearing it spelled out cracked something inside me. The next morning, things went back to normal. Mom was all smiles, pretending last night never happened. Dad avoided my eyes, his usual. "Ready for your shoot, sweetheart?" Mom chirped as she straightened my dress. Her hands felt cold, her smile too stretched. And so, we continued, the camera capturing smiles that never quite reached my eyes, in a house that felt more like a set every day. I played my part, the golden child, not yet understanding the shadows that played behind the scenes of our picture-perfect life. Grandma and Grandpa, they saw through it all. They'd visit, shaking their heads, whispering about how kids needed dirt and sun, not spotlights and scripts. "Can't she just be a kid, Ava?" Grandpa would grumble as soon as he stepped through the door, his brows furrowed in disapproval. Mom would force a smile, her patience thin. "Dad, times have changed. Emily's opportunities are golden. We're setting her up for life." I'd watch from the corner, clutching a doll I wasn't allowed to dirty. Their visits were my only break from the constant clicks of Dad's camera. He'd put it down then, his face softening. "Let's all just relax for the evening. How about a movie, everyone?" Dad would suggest, his voice almost a plea. Mom's eyes would narrow, her lips pursed. "Sure, after Emily finishes her shoot with the new organic juice line. It's just a few photos, then we can all relax, as you put it." The shoots weren't quick. They never were. Dad tried to keep things light, goofy faces behind the camera, to make me giggle on cue. "Come on, pumpkin, show me the biggest smile. Think about, oh, ice cream." He'd cheer, hoping to catch a genuine moment. Mom didn't do patience. "Jake, focus. We need these perfect. The company is watching closely. They want the natural, happy child, not some sugared-up toddler." The arguments got more heated when the camera was off. Grandma and Grandpa would try to steal me away for a weekend, desperate to give me a taste of normal. "Ava, she should come stay with us. Just a few days. Let her run around, play in the mud." Grandpa would argue as he put on his coat, ready to leave, but not ready to give up. "And what? Miss a casting call? No, Dad. We're not risking opportunities. She's fine." Mom would snap, her words final. It wasn't all bad. Sometimes, in the quiet mornings before Mom woke up, Dad would make pancakes, drizzling extra syrup and letting me toss in handfuls of chocolate chips. "Don't tell your mom." He'd wink, the secret sweet between us. "Promise." I'd giggle, the syrup sticky on my fingers, the moment light and free. But freedom was always fleeting. As soon as Mom's footsteps echoed down the hall, it was back to business. Hair brushed, face washed, and dressed in whatever outfit she'd laid out. In those days, I didn't understand the weight of sacrifice or the price of the path laid out before me. I only knew the routine, the constant push, and the clear understanding that my childhood wasn't really my own. It belonged to the brand, the image, the unspoken sacrifice of what could have been. When the sickness hit, it came without warning. One day, I was posing for a yogurt ad, all grins and giggles. The next, I was burning up, my body a battleground. Mom panicked, but not in the way you'd hope. Her first thought wasn't about getting me to a doctor, it was about how many shoots we'd have to cancel. "Ava, we need to get her to the hospital, now." Dad was pacing, his voice edged with a panic I'd rarely heard from him. "Just a minute, Jake. Let me think." Mom snapped back, her phone in one hand, probably scrolling through her calendar. "Think? She's burning up, Ava. This isn't about your bloody schedule." Dad's shout would have scared me if I weren't so out of it. In the hospital, they said it was polio. I didn't really understand then what it meant, only that it was bad, really bad. Mom's face went white when the doctor explained. But she's been so healthy, Mom muttered to herself more than anyone else, her face twisted in confusion and anger. Mrs. Dawson, Emily wasn't vaccinated against polio. It's extremely rare nowadays because most children are vaccinated, the doctor explained gently, a look of sympathy across his face. Dad looked like he'd been punched. Not vaccinated? Ava, what, why? Mom's lips thinned, her usual defense rising quick. Don't you start on me, Jake. It was a choice we made. I was moved to a room, wires and tubes hooking me to machines that beeped and blinked. Days turned into weeks. I missed the sun, my sketches, even the annoying flash of Dad's camera. Mom rarely stayed long. She'd come in, sit for a bit, her foot tapping relentless on the sterile tiles. Emily, you need to fight this. You know how much is riding on you getting better, she'd say, her voice tight, like she was negotiating a deal instead of comforting her daughter. More than anything, I wanted all of this to be just a bad dream, to wake up in my bed with Mr. Snuggles tight in my arms, ready for another day of pretend. But the nightmare was real, and it wasn't just the sickness. It was seeing the strain on Dad's face, hearing the impatience in Mom's voice, feeling the distance grow between who I was and who I was supposed to be. Can't you just sit with her? Dad's voice would rise sometimes when he thought I was sleeping. She's scared, Ava. She needs us. She needs to get better. Sitting and coddling isn't going to fix her, Jake. Mom's reply, always sharp, like a slap. Days blurred together, each one a repeat of the last, beeps, whispers, and the heavy weight of knowing that to Mom, I was a project failing to meet its deadline. 2 years of my life blurred into a continuous loop of bed sheets, window views, and the ceaseless ticking of the clock. Bedridden, I became a fixture in my own home, an inconvenient piece of furniture rather than a daughter. Mom's irritation grew with each passing day, her frustration palpable every time she had to tend to me. Changing my diapers or washing me, she did it all with a grimace. This is not what I signed up for, she'd mutter under her breath, her hands rough, her care lacking warmth. Dad tried to compensate. Every evening, he'd come into my room with a fairy tale book in hand, his voice a soft echo of better times. Let's escape to a kingdom far away, Emily, he'd whisper, trying to lift my spirits as we dived into stories of brave heroes and far-off lands. But the daylight hours were long and lonely. Left to myself, I found solace in drawing. My sketches became my silent rebellion, my hidden diary. Crayons and pencils were my companions, crafting scenes far different from the sterile room I was confined to. I heard Mom's complaints, her selfish frustrations. She was tired of wearing the same outfits to parties because the money had dried up. I'm stuck in last season's wardrobe while you lie around, she'd yell, her voice echoing off the walls, filled with a bitterness that cut deeper than the loneliness. Grandma and Grandpa saw the toll it was taking on me. They'd visit, laden with worry, their faces etched with concern. Let her come stay with us for a while, Grandpa would suggest, his voice a gentle plea. She needs a change of scenery, needs to feel loved. But Mom would have none of it. Absolutely not. What would people think if they knew I'd shipped her off to her grandparents? My image as a mother is at stake. Her voice was shrill, tinged with desperation. Her tantrums became more frequent, a testament to the crumbling facade of her once glamorous life. Dad's response was to retreat further into his shell, the bottle his only solace. Nights were filled with the sounds of Mom's crying fits and the clinking of Dad's glass. When I turned 8, a flicker of hope emerged as I began to slowly pull myself upright, leaning heavily on the bedpost. But one leg didn't cooperate. It was thinner, shorter, a lasting reminder of the illness that had ravaged my body. Mom dragged me to countless doctors, her face etched with a mix of hope and fear. Is there nothing you can do? She would demand, her tone sharp as she addressed the specialists. I'm sorry, but these are post-polio complications. There's not much we can do to reverse this, the doctors would explain, their faces somber. The realization that I would never again be the perfect model child hit her like a storm. Rage replaced her initial shock. At home, she turned that rage on me. "Look what you've done to yourself," she'd scream. "If you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened. You've ruined everything." Her words stung, and I'd retreat further into my sketches, my only escape from her relentless blame. My drawings became darker, a mirror to the turmoil inside me. Yet, they also held a strange beauty, a testament to my endurance and my spirit, which refused to be crushed. Nights in my room were long and silent, filled only with the scratching of my pencils against paper as I lost myself in drawing worlds far kinder than my own. My comics became my sanctuary, a place where I was the hero, not the victim. "Why do you even bother with that stuff?" Mom's harsh voice would slice through the quiet as she barged into my room. "It's not like it's going to get us back on track. You should be focusing on something useful." I learned to just nod, not trusting my voice. My drawings hid under my bed, my fears and dreams bleeding onto the pages in secret. I had no friends to call, no schoolmates to lean on, my world was confined to these four walls. And the only connection I had to the outside was through my online classes and occasional, whispered phone calls with my grandparents who seemed to be the only ones who cared. One night, something changed. It was late, and the house was quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard it, muffled screams from downstairs. Heart pounding, I limped to my door, easing it open just enough to peek through. "I can't do this anymore, Jake. Look at her, look at what she's become." Mom's voice was frantic, laced with disgust. "I can't stand to look at her anymore." Dad's response was slurred, tired. "She's still our daughter, Ava. We can't just throw her away." "That's exactly what we're going to do," she snapped back. "Here, give her this and make it look like she ran away. Maybe some robber will do us a favor tonight and get rid of the geek." Dad's steps were heavy, his presence larger as he approached my room. The door creaked open, and there he stood, a silhouette of the man he once was, his eyes sad, his breath heavy with alcohol. "We're going for a drive, Em," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I could only nod, my whole body trembling as I followed him out to the car. We ended up in a part of town that even nightmares would hesitate to visit. Dad stopped the car, and his next words were barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I don't know what else to do." He handed me the phone, his hands shaking. "Keep this with you. Please forgive me." Then he left, just like that. I stood there, alone, the cold biting through my thin pajamas. My hands clutched the phone like a lifeline as sounds of distant fights filled the air. But they made one mistake, they left the SIM card in the phone. Shaking, I dialed Grandpa's number. "Grandpa, please, you have to help me. I'm scared. I don't know where I am." "Hold on, Emily. We're coming. Just stay hidden and keep the phone on." Grandpa's voice was firm, a promise in the dark. I hid behind a trash can, my body shaking from fear and cold, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Every noise made my heart jump, every shadow a monster in the dim street light. Finally, headlights swept around the corner, and Grandpa's car came into view. They had never driven so fast, and never had I felt so relieved to see them. Grandpa and Grandma rushed out, their arms wide open. After they rescued me, Grandpa and Grandma drove straight to Mom and Dad's house. They were furious, their anger crackling through the air like electricity. I stayed in the car, but I could hear the raised voices even from the driveway. "You've gone too far this time, Ava." Grandpa's voice boomed. "Please don't tell anyone," Mom pleaded, her voice cracking with fear. "Think about what they'll do to us." Grandma was relentless. "You're not fit to be her mother. You're signing over custody, Ava. Today." And just like that, they secured my freedom. Mom signed the papers, her tears of fear a far cry from repentance. Dad was silent, his head bowed, the fight gone out of him. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was peaceful. They had a small, cozy house with a big backyard and a garden that seemed enchanted, bursting with colors and life. Grandpa taught me how to plant flowers, his rough hands gentle on the earth. plants gotta be nurtured, just like people, he'd say, a smile tucked into his beard. Grandma was a whirlwind of love and baked goods. She always had a new recipe to try, and the kitchen was our laboratory. Sugar fixes a lot of things, especially moods. She'd wink, passing me a spoonful of cookie dough. I started going to a regular school not long after moving in. I was nervous, limping distinctly, self-conscious about my leg. But to my surprise, the kids were kind. They didn't stare or whisper like I'd feared. Instead, they were curious, accepting. "Wanna play with us?" a girl named Lucy asked during recess one day. "Sure," I replied, a grin breaking over my face, surprised by the simplicity of the moment, how easy it felt to just be a kid among others. Art class became my refuge, where I truly flourished. Mr. Hernandez, the art teacher, noticed my talent right away. "You've got a real gift, Emily. Ever thought about showing your work to the world?" he encouraged. Taking his advice, I started posting my drawings online. It was just a few sketches at first, but soon, I had followers, a community of people who didn't just see the drawings, they saw me. They understood the stories I was telling through my art. Evenings at home were my favorite time. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch, Grandpa with his pipe and Grandma with her knitting, the day winding down around us like a soft blanket. "Life's good, isn't it?" Grandpa would ask, looking out at the garden bathed in twilight. "It's wonderful," I'd answer, leaning against Grandma, feeling safe and loved in a way I hadn't known was possible. At 19, life threw me into a new chapter, art school, with a scholarship that recognized my talents. The girl who once sketched in secret was now a known name in the online art community. Even my characters jumped off the pages, finding their way onto comic book covers and city walls as graffiti. Enrolling in art school was a dream realized. It was my chance to dive deeper, to explore the roots of artistic expression through classical training. "You're going to rock this, Emily," Grandpa said on the day I received my acceptance letter, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Yeah, kid, show 'em how it's done," Grandma added, always quick to throw in her fiery support. The campus was buzzing with creativity, a place pulsing with potential. My first day felt like stepping into a larger world, one I was eager to explore and influence. Studying was intense, but fulfilling. I absorbed techniques and histories that made my work richer, more grounded. My professors encouraged experimentation, leading me to blend traditional methods with my unique style. "You have a rare gift, Emily. Your perspective is refreshing," Professor Ames noted during a critique, his words bolstering my confidence. Parallel to my studies, I organized an exhibition of my paintings. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was a narrative display, telling stories of overcoming and becoming. "Each piece tells a story, doesn't it?" a visitor remarked during the opening night, her eyes tracing the lines of my largest canvas. "Absolutely. Each stroke has a part of my journey," I explained, finding joy in sharing my vision. The local media caught wind of my story, intrigued by the artist who conquered personal and physical challenges to create. They filmed reports at the exhibition, interviewing me about my work and life. "Emily Dawson isn't just an artist, she's a phenomenon," one reporter said as the camera light blinked red. I walked through the exhibition, my special shoes, and sometimes a cane aiding my steps. I wasn't hiding my limp, I was owning it. "You turn adversity into art," an art enthusiast commented, pointing at my cane, which I'd painted in bright colors. Photos of me appeared in fashion magazines again, a full-circle moment. But this time, I posed because I wanted to, each photo a testament to my agency and artistry. "She redefines beauty," read the caption under a photo of me, my painted cane in hand, standing boldly beside one of my vibrant murals. By the time I finished my degree, I wasn't just a graduate with honors, I was a symbol of perseverance, a living canvas of my own making. And as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, cane in hand, the applause wasn't just for my academic achievement but for the journey that brought me there. The art gallery buzzed with chatter and the click of cameras, the air electric with admiration for the work lining the walls. I mingled with guests, my heart swollen with pride and nerves, It was a big day, the culmination of years of hard work and passion. The space was filled with my paintings, each piece a chapter of my life, a battle fought and won. Out of nowhere, the atmosphere shifted. My heart stopped for a second when I saw them, my parents. They have changed a lot. Dad looked worn, more lines on his face, his eyes dimmer. Mom's beauty disappeared, revealing her true self. I watched, frozen, as Mom made her way to the reporters who were filming. With the flair of someone used to the spotlight, she announced loudly, "I'm Emily's mother, and I'm just so overwhelmed with pride for what she's accomplished." The camera swung to her, eating up her performance. She's always been incredibly talented, and seeing all she's achieved, it's a mother's dream come true. I couldn't take it. My body moved on its own, fueled by a mix of anger and disbelief. "No," I interrupted sharply, my voice slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "I owe everything to my grandparents. They are the reason I am who I am today." Away from the prying eyes and lenses of the media, I pulled my parents aside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mom's act dropped as soon as we were out of earshot, her eyes cold and calculating. "Emily, darling, we need your help," she began, the sweetness in her voice sickening. "Your father has had some troubles, he's lost his job, and we've had to sell the house. We have nowhere to go. You owe us, Emily." "I owed you nothing the moment you left me on that street," I shot back, my resolve hard as steel. "If you ever come near me or my grandparents, I'll go to the police." "Don't think I won't." They knew I meant every word. Without another word, they turned and left, disappearing back into the shadows from which they had emerged. That night, after the guests had left and the lights in the gallery dimmed, I took a moment to walk through the quiet space. My paintings looked back at me, each one a testament to my journey. I had faced my past, confronted the pain, and came out the other side stronger. Back home, in the quiet comfort of Grandma and Grandpa's house, I finally felt at peace. Here, in this house filled with love and acceptance, I knew I was home, truly home. Back when I was 10, life seemed a whole lot simpler. We lived in a small, rented house on the edge of town, but to Mom and Dad, it was more than that. It was a stepping stone to something bigger, something permanent. They had dreams, you know? Dreams of me going off to college, wearing a white coat or strutting around a courtroom. But me, I had different plans. I remember this one summer evening, we were all sitting out back on our rickety old porch. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across our tiny yard, and Dad was flipping burgers on his ancient grill that looked like it might fall apart any second. "Diana, you gotta start thinking about your future," Dad said, poking at the burgers with a spatula that had seen better days. "Doctor or lawyer, that's where the money's at. Secure." Mom nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Your father's right, honey. We just want you to have a stable career. Something prestigious." I kicked at the dirt with my sneaker, watching it puff up in little clouds. "I want to be an archaeologist," I mumbled, barely loud enough for them to hear. "Dig up ancient stuff, you know?" Dad let out a hearty laugh, the kind that made his belly bounce. "Archaeologist, huh? Why don't you start by digging us a new flower bed out front?" Mom gave him a soft swat on the arm. "David, don't tease her. If she wants to dig, let her dig." "But in her own garden," Dad chuckled, flipping a burger onto a slightly charred bun. "Here, taste tester, tell me if I got the seasoning right this time." He handed me the burger, and I took a big bite, the juices running down my chin. "It's good, Dad," I said after swallowing the mouthful. "That's my girl," he grinned, ruffling my hair. That's how it was back then. Light-hearted jabs and evening chats. It was one of those moments, you know? Where you feel like everything's gonna be alright. "Yeah, maybe I will dig up something big one day. Like dinosaurs or treasure," I said, feeling bolder. "Treasure, huh?" Dad laughed again. "Just don't go digging under the house. The only thing you'll find is old plumbing." We all laughed together, the sound mingling with the chirping of the crickets as the sky turned a deep shade of purple. Those nights on the porch were my favorite. Just us, our little family, talking about everything and nothing at all. Not long after those lazy summer nights, things started to change. It was like one day Mom was her usual self, buzzing around the kitchen, and the next, she was always tired, always sitting down. I didn't get it at first. Parents get sick, right? A cold here, a headache there. But this was different. "Diana, can you grab the laundry for me?" Mom asked one evening. Her voice was weak, and she was pale, paler than I'd ever seen her. "Sure, Mom," I said, hauling the basket up from the basement. It was heavier than I expected, or maybe I just noticed it more because I kept stealing glances at Mom, slouched on the sofa, looking like all her strings had been cut. "Thanks, honey," she whispered as I dropped the basket beside her. "You're becoming quite the helper, you know?" I shrugged, feeling uneasy. "Is everything okay, Mom?" She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a bit under the weather, that's all. Don't you worry." But it was more than that. Much more. Dad knew it too. Their whispers filled the nights, whispers that I wasn't meant to hear, but did. Words like doctors and tests floated through the cracks of my slightly ajar bedroom door. Then, the bombshell dropped. "I've got cancer, Diana," Mom said one gray morning, her words stark against the clatter of breakfast dishes. Dad stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, his eyes dark pits of worry. What does that mean?" I asked, not really wanting to hear the answer. "It means I'm very sick," she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "But the doctors are going to help me." Dad chimed in, his voice gruff. "We're gonna fight this, right? All of us together." But it wasn't a fight we could win. Not this time. Mom got weaker, the life slowly draining out of her as if she was a balloon with a tiny hole, and all the air was slipping out. The hospital visits became more frequent. I hated those places. They smelled like disinfectant and despair. Mom was often too tired to talk after the treatments, and I'd sit by her bed, holding her hand, trying not to cry. "Don't you worry, Diana," she'd say on her better days, a shadow of her usual spark in her eyes. "You're strong. You'll be okay." "I don't want to be strong," I'd whisper back. "I just want you to be okay." But she wasn't. And then one day, she just wasn't there anymore. After Mom passed, Dad didn't take long to start changing too. It was like he couldn't deal with the quiet of the house, the empty spaces Mom used to fill. That's when Carol came into the picture. "Diana, this is Carol," Dad introduced her one evening, a few months after Mom's funeral. Carol was all bright lipstick and too loud laughter. "Hi, Diana," Carol cooed, bending down to my level, which just annoyed me. "I've heard so much about you." Dad was watching, expecting me to say something. "Nice to meet you," I mumbled, but it wasn't really. Nothing about it was nice. Carol moved in not long after that. Her stuff invaded our house like weeds, spreading and taking over spaces that used to be filled with Mom's things. I hated it. I hated how Dad laughed with her, how he seemed to forget the shadows that had clung to him. Life with Carol kicked off with small annoyances, the kind you might brush off at first, but soon enough, they pile up, weighing you down. I noticed her subtle digs right after the wedding. It was like a switch had flipped. One morning, as I was getting ready for school, I couldn't find my favorite blue sweater. I rummaged through my drawers, throwing clothes left and right. Frustrated, I stormed into the kitchen where Carol was sipping her coffee, looking too pleased with herself. "Have you seen my sweater? The blue one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Carol looked up, her eyes narrow. "Oh, that old thing? I might have tossed it. It was getting too shabby, don't you think?" I stared at her, my fists clenching at my sides. "It was my favorite. Mom gave it to me." She shrugged, turning back to her magazine. "You need to grow up, Diana. Stop clinging to rags." That was Carol. She'd throw away bits of my life as if they were crumbs on a table, and I was supposed to just clean up and move on. During meals, I began to notice that my food tasted weird. My soup was always too salty, and my vegetables soggy. One evening, I finally spit it out, right there at the dinner table. "Dad, this tastes awful," I exclaimed, pushing my plate away. Carol's eyes flashed with something dark, but Dad was oblivious. He glanced from me to Carol, then back to me. "Now, Diana, Carol's been on her feet cooking all day. Apologize, that's rude." I looked down at my plate, biting my tongue to stop the tears. "Sorry," I muttered, not really sorry at all. Then there were my clothes. Carol took me shopping one weekend, and every single item she chose was a disaster. Everything was too big, the colors drab. "These will last longer as you grow," she said, pushing a pile of oversized shirts and pants into my arms at the checkout. I tried on one of the outfits for the first day back at school. I looked ridiculous, sleeves hanging past my hands, pants baggy and tripping me up. The kids at school didn't let it slide. "Hey, Scarecrow, Halloween's over," they'd jeer as I walked by, my cheeks burning with shame. I came home that day, threw the clothes on the floor, and yelled, "I can't wear this stuff to school anymore." Carol, always lurking around like she had nothing better to do, called back from the living room. "You'll wear what we buy, and that's that. You should be grateful." One night, I tried again to talk to Dad. I caught him in the garage, tinkering with some old radio he'd found at a yard sale. "Dad, can we talk?" I ventured, watching his hands move over the wires. He didn't look up. "Sure, kiddo, what's up?" "It's Carol. She's not nice to me when you're not around." There, I'd said it. My heart was racing, waiting for him to see the truth. Dad stopped what he was doing, finally looking up, but the expression on his face wasn't what I hoped for. His brows furrowed, and his voice was stern. "Diana, Carol's trying her best. You need to give her a chance, stop making things up." Making things up? My own father didn't believe me. "But, Dad." "No buts. I don't want to hear this nonsense again." He turned back to his radio, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I walked out of the garage, my vision blurry with tears. It was clear then. Dad was in Carol's corner, no matter what. I was on my own. School used to be my escape, a place where I could forget home troubles, at least for a few hours. But with Carol's influence creeping into every aspect of my life, even school became a battleground. Sometimes, after particularly rough mornings, I'd hide in the library during lunch. Books don't laugh at you or call you names. But one day, Mrs. Pearson, the librarian, caught on that something was off. "You're here a lot lately, Diana. Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes kind but worried. I shrugged, my standard response these days. "Just like the quiet," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Quiet's good, helps you think. But friends are good too," she replied, leaving me with a gentle smile and a feeling that maybe someone actually saw me. Then there was Grandma June. Visiting her was like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a stuffy room. She'd always greet me with a big hug and the smell of something delicious baking. As we sat at her kitchen table, eating warm apple pie, I'd open up about everything: school, the kids, not fitting in. Everything but the full truth of Carol's nastiness. That, I kept buried. Didn't want to worry her. "Kids can be tough," Grandma would say, slicing another piece of pie. "But remember, it's not about fitting in. It's about standing tall, being yourself." Sometimes, I'd help her in the garden, pulling weeds or watering plants. It was during one of these afternoons, hands in the dirt, that I finally hinted at how tough things were with Carol. "Grandma, what do you do when someone just doesn't like you, no matter what?" I asked, dumping a trowel full of weeds into the bin. "Oh, honey," she sighed, wiping her brow. "Some folks, you just can't win over. But remember, it says more about them than it does about you. Hold your head high, do what's right, and let their problems be their own." Her words were a balm, soothing the raw edges of my daily battles. Grandma's place became my sanctuary, the one spot where I could shed the weight of being the odd one out, the misfit in ill-fitting clothes. If life was a game, it felt like I was losing, badly. But then, things took a turn, like they often do when you least expect it. Carol got pregnant. You'd think that would smooth things over, but nah, it just cranked up the tension. I remember the day she told us. Dad and I were in the living room, half watching some show when Carol strutted in, beaming like she'd won the lottery. "I've got news," she announced, her voice ringing a bit too cheerful. Dad muted the TV, turning to her with a raised eyebrow. "What's up?" "We're having a baby," she gushed, her hands on her belly as if she was already showing. Dad, well, he looked like someone had smacked him upside the head, but then he started smiling, really smiling. That's great, honey." He got up and hugged her, and I just sat there, trying to figure out how I felt about it. The pregnancy changed Carol's mood swings into something epic. One minute she'd be sweet as pie, the next she'd snap over the smallest things. And somehow, her bad moods were often my fault. Then the miscarriage happened. It was a shock, even to me. Carol was devastated, and I actually felt sorry for her, for both of them, until she twisted it into something ugly. "It's stressful, living with her," I overheard her tell Dad one night. "Stress is bad for the pregnancy." It was too much. Her words stung like a slap. I was just existing, trying to stay out of her way, and now I was being blamed for this? Dad didn't argue with her, didn't defend me. That night, I lay in bed, realizing fully and painfully that I was alone in that house. Dad's silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The next few weeks were rough. Carol walked around like a wounded queen, and Dad tiptoed around her. I tried to make myself invisible, but Carol would find ways to jab at me. "See what you've caused," she hissed one day as I passed by the living room, where she was curled up on the couch. "You're just a problem child." I stopped, turned to her. "I didn't do anything to you." "Don't talk back to me," she snapped. "Just go to your room." I went, not because she told me to, but because I couldn't stand to look at her, to hear the lies twisting around me like chains. Things got worse after Carol found out she couldn't have any more kids. The doctors were clear, and so was Dad's response when he tried to console her. "We've got Diana, no need to fuss," he said, as if I could be a stand-in for the child they lost. That only made Carol meaner. She started getting more physical, pinching me when no one was looking, leaving marks where clothes would cover. Every pinch was a message, a reminder that I was the reason for her unhappiness. One day at school, during gym, I changed into shorts and a tee. That's when Lisa, a girl I sometimes studied with, noticed the bruises. "Diana, what happened to your arms?" she gasped, her eyes wide. I pulled down my sleeves quickly, my heart racing. I fell down the stairs at home," I lied, avoiding her gaze. Lisa looked worried but didn't push it. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Later that day, Mrs. Jenkins, my English teacher, pulled me aside. "Diana, I've heard from a few students, they're worried about you. They've seen bruises." Her voice was soft but firm. "What's happening at home?" I felt trapped, the lie heavy on my tongue. "I'm just clumsy, I guess." That afternoon, Dad was called into school. I waited at home, anxiety gnawing at my insides. When he finally stormed in, his face was thunderous. "Diana, what have you been telling your teachers?" he barked as soon as he walked through the door. "Nothing, Dad, Don't lie to me. Mrs. Jenkins called me at work, said there's talk about bruises and whatnot. You're making us look bad. You're making Carol look bad." "I'm not making anything up." The truth burst from me in desperation. "She's hurting me, Dad. Carol is hurting me when you're not around." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're being dramatic. Carol wouldn't hurt a fly. You're just trying to cause trouble, aren't you? Go to your room. You're grounded. No dinner." He grabbed my arm, not caring about the bruises, and dragged me to my room, locking the door behind him. I heard Carol's voice then, her words slithering under the door. "See? No one believes a little liar. You just made your life a real nightmare, Diana." I felt so alone, so cornered. There was nothing left to do but the one thing I had avoided. I called Grandma June. "Grandma, can I come live with you? Please, I can't stay here anymore," I sobbed into the phone after telling her everything. There was a pause, a heavy silence, then, "Of course, darling. I'll be there as soon as I can." She must have driven like the wind, because it wasn't long before she was at the door. Dad tried to stop her at first, saying he could handle his own family. But Grandma was fierce. "If you don't let her go, I'll take this to the police. I'll sue you and your wife for everything you've done to her," she threatened, her voice steely. Dad looked between Carol and me, his face a mix of anger and defeat. Finally, he stepped aside. "Fine. Take her then." Carol's only response was a satisfied smirk, as if she'd won some twisted game. At Grandma's, my room was waiting, a sanctuary painted in soft blues and filled with sunlight. "You're going to be okay, Diana," Grandma said, standing in the doorway with a smile that reached her eyes. I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed that things could be okay. That night, I slept without fear, without dreading what the next day might bring. I was free, and I was home. Living with Grandma June was like being reborn into a world where I could actually breathe. We fixed up the house together, baked cookies, and laughed a lot. She let me invite friends over, something Carol never did, and suddenly, I had a normal life. We traveled too. Grandma loved hitting the road, said it was good for the soul. She even bought me a professional camera to capture everything we saw. Photography quickly became more than a hobby. It was my way of seeing the world, capturing moments that felt too big for words. Years slipped by, happy and full, a stark contrast to the life I'd left behind. Dad never called, never sent birthday wishes. It was as if I'd vanished from his life, which was fine by me. I had Grandma, and that was enough. But then, Grandma got sick, her heart giving out after a lifetime of giving everything to everyone else. When she passed, it felt like losing my anchor. I organized the funeral with her close friend, Mrs. Avery, who knew just how much Grandma had meant to me. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences, a soft murmur of sadness that matched the gray sky overhead. But then, Dad and Carol showed up, their faces strangely bright, almost eager. It sickened me. As people started leaving, Dad and Carol lingered, and we ended up at Grandma's house. That's when Carol, ever the viper, told me to pack up my things. "This house now belongs to your father," she sneered, eyeing the place like it was a cash register ready to pop open. Dad was inspecting the walls, the cabinets, nodding along like he was already planning renovations. "Yeah, Diana, pack your things and get out of here." I couldn't help but laugh. They both frowned. "What's so funny?" Dad asked, his tone sharp. "Grandma knew you might pull something like this," I said, pulling out the will from my bag. "She left everything to me, the house, the money, everything. It's all in my name." The color drained from their faces. It was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in years. Dad recovered first, a greedy glint in his eye. "Well, then, as your father, I'll just have to manage that inheritance for you." Carol was nodding, almost drooling with anticipation. Think of what I could do with that money. A new car, some work done to keep me looking young. I cut them off with another laugh, louder this time. "Manage my inheritance? Dad, you're so out of the loop you didn't even realize I turned 18 last month. I'm my own guardian now. Legally, I control everything." Their jaws dropped. It was comic, really. They tried to argue, to beg, but I was done. I'd had years of their neglect and cruelty, years to build up the strength Grandma had nurtured in me. "Out. Now," I said, my voice firm, echoing through the empty halls of a house that had never felt more like a fortress. They left, Carol spitting insults over her shoulder, Dad's shoulders slumped in defeat. The door slammed shut, and the sound was like the closing of a long, painful chapter of my life. 10 years had woven themselves into the fabric of my life seamlessly. I was 28 now, living the kind of life Grandma June would have been proud of. I worked as a lawyer at one of the city's most prestigious firms, a dream my mother had harbored for me. My days were filled with briefs, courtrooms, and justice. My life was full, fulfilling, and most importantly, it was mine. One evening, as I was wrapping up a particularly challenging case file, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and hesitating only for a moment, I answered. "Diana." The voice was unmistakably Dad's, strained and rough as if each word was a struggle. "I need your help." The voice from my past, not heard for a decade, dropped like a stone in my stomach. "Look, we're in a bit of a situation here. Carol and we've hit a rough patch financially. We need some help, some money to get out of debt. It's urgent." I paused, taking a moment to process the nerve, the audacity. Memories, dark and dusty, filtered back through the recesses of my mind. "You must be joking," I said finally, my voice cold and even. "After everything, you call me for money?" In the background, I could hear Carol's voice, shrill and panicky. "Tell her she owes us, after everything we've done for her." I couldn't help but laugh, short and humorless. "Oh, you? For what, exactly? For throwing me out? For siding with Carol over your own daughter?" There was a pause on the line, a crackle of tension. Then Carol was back, her voice cutting through. "You'll regret this. We'll take you to court. We'll get our alimony." That only made me laugh again, harder this time. "Carol, I'm a lawyer. Remember? You have no grounds for alimony, and frankly, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You renounced any claim to me when Grandma became my guardian. Legally, you're nothing to me." Dad tried again, desperation seeping through. "Diana, please." But I was done. "No. You made your choice years ago. Live with it. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up, my heart pounding, but my decision was clear. I blocked the number immediately, leaning back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I turned back to my desk, my eyes caught the framed photo of Grandma and me, taken on one of our many trips, a reminder of where I came from and the strength I carried. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, because I knew no matter what came my way, I was ready. Hi, I'm Ella. It all started back when I was a fresh-faced hairdresser, barely out of school and already behind the chair at a small salon downtown. Those were simpler times, just me and my scissors, and the whole world seemed like it was there for the taking. It was a regular Tuesday when James first walked in. The bell above the door jangled and in he came, looking around like he wasn't sure he'd come to the right place. His hair was a mess, a wave of thick curls that looked like they fought comb and scissors equally. "Hey, you open for a walk-in?" he asked, his voice unsure over the buzz of hairdryers and chit-chat. "Sure thing, take a seat," I said, pointing to my chair. He sat down, and I threw the cape over him, snapping it at the back a bit tighter than necessary. "What are we doing today?" "Just, make it look like I ain't been dragged through a hedge backwards," he joked, half smiling in the mirror. I laughed, picking up my scissors. "I reckon I can do that." As I worked, we started talking. Turns out, we both had a thing for old-school rock bands and hated modern pop. "Can't stand that electronic stuff they play everywhere now," he grumbled. "Tell me about it. Give me some Zeppelin or Floyd any day," I replied, snipping away. "Exactly," he said, and just like that, it was like we'd known each other for years. We talked about everything under the sun, books, movies, you name it. By the time I was done, his hair looked 100 times better, and there was something in his smile that told me this wouldn't be the last I'd see of him. He came back every other week for a trim, always timing his visits so it'd be my chair he'd end up in. We started grabbing coffee after my shifts, and those coffees turned into dinners, and well, you know how it goes. A year later, we were married. Nothing fancy, just us and our families in the backyard of his folks' place. We were so broke back then that our honeymoon was 3 days in a lakeside cabin that smelled like mildew and old fish. But we didn't care, we were on top of the world. Then along came Michael, our little bundle of joy. Having him was tough at first, what with money being tight and me trying to juggle motherhood with work. But we made it through, mostly because James was right there with me, taking on night feeds and diaper changes without a single complaint. Life was good. Really good. We had our ups and downs, sure, but who doesn't? I loved my job, got to meet all sorts of folks from around town. Everyone had a story, and they all seemed to want to share theirs with me. Guess I just have one of those faces. 30 years sure fly by when you're busy living life. Now, I'm 52, and not just any hairdresser, but the one in town everyone waits a month to see. James climbed his way up too, now he's the big boss at his company. We've got ourselves a beautiful house that's a bit too quiet now that it's just the two of us. Our son Michael, 29 and all grown up, lives in his own place across town. Life at the salon was always bustling, but on one rainy afternoon, it got a bit more interesting. Clara walked in, drenched from head to toe, looking like she needed more than just a hairdryer. She had a sad sort of look in her eyes that caught me right away. I could tell she needed a chat as much as a new hairstyle. "Rough day, huh?" I asked as she plopped down in my chair, not even caring as the water dripped from her coat onto the floor. "You could say that," she sighed, taking off her soggy hat and revealing a mess of tangled, wet hair. "Just split with my boyfriend. Feels like my heart's been through the ringer." "Well, you're in the right place for a pick-me-up," I said, draping a towel around her shoulders. "Let's get you dried off and fixed up. How about we try something new today? Give you a fresh start?" Clara nodded, looking up at me through the mirror. "I'd like that. I really would." As I worked on her hair, we talked about all sorts. Turns out, she was new in town, trying to start over after everything that had gone south with her ex. I found myself giving her bits of advice, not just about hair, but about finding her feet in a new place. By the time I was done, she had a sleek new bob that framed her face perfectly, and her smile was starting to peek through again. "You know, I feel lighter already," she admitted, checking out her new look. "Thanks, Ella. Seriously." "Anytime, Clara. You know where to find me," I said, handing her the mirror so she could see the back. Just then, Michael walked in, surprising me during work hours. He'd been doing some errands around town and decided to drop by. His eyes landed on Clara, and I saw that same spark I'd noticed between me and James all those years ago. "Mom, hey, who's this?" Michael asked, trying not to make it obvious he was checking Clara out. "This is Clara. Clara, meet my son Michael. He's usually not around during the day, thinks he's too busy for his old mom," I joked, giving Michael a playful glare. "Nice to meet you, Clara. And Mom, I'm never too busy for you," Michael shot back with a grin. Clara laughed, and I could see her warming up to Michael's charm. "Nice to meet you too, Michael. Your mom's been telling me all about the town. Sounds like you both know it inside out." "Yeah, well, I could show you some places if you like," Michael offered, and I almost rolled my eyes at how smooth he was being. "That'd be great," Clara said, her smile bright and genuine now. As they chatted, I cleaned up my station, keeping one ear on their conversation. It was clear they clicked instantly. Michael offered to take her out for a coffee to continue their tour guide chat, and Clara agreed. Watching them walk out together, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy for Michael, seeing him light up around Clara, but a part of me worried, too. Starting new relationships on the rebound can be tricky, and I hoped he wouldn't end up getting hurt. Michael and Clara, who quickly became like a daughter to me, had rushed into marriage. It was a whirlwind, sure, but seeing them so happy made everything feel right. We often had them over at our place, where laughter filled the rooms more than the light. I loved those dinners. Clara would always joke about her taste in men, teasing Michael by saying she liked them slender and athletic. Michael would play along, sucking in his gut and flexing like a bodybuilder, which had us all cracking up every time. It was all in good fun. And after we ate, Clara would help clean up without missing a beat, saying she couldn't just sit and watch me do all the work. It warmed my heart to have such a caring daughter-in-law. James and we were doing all right ourselves. He had become a big shot at his company, always busy, always on the move. But things started to change, subtly at first. He began working late more often, and his business trips multiplied. I'd ask him about all the extra hours and travel, and he'd just shrug it off, saying, "It's a busy season, Ella. Gotta make hay while the sun shines." I couldn't argue with that, but it was his newfound love for the gym that really threw me for a loop. One morning, I found him digging out workout clothes from the back of our closet. "What's all this about?" I asked, watching him as he packed a gym bag. "Got to keep up with the young guys at work," he chuckled, zipping the bag shut. "Can't let them think I'm getting old." "That so?" I teased, leaning against the doorframe. "Well, look at you, Mr. Fitness." He flashed me a grin. "Who knows, maybe I'll get abs like Michael." I laughed, because the thought of James, who usually avoided physical exertion like it was the plague, suddenly turning into a gym buff, was too bizarre. But, I have to admit, part of me was glad. Glad he was taking care of himself. It seemed like a good thing. Life seemed almost perfect. Our home was filled with love and laughter, our careers were thriving, and with Michael and Clara so happy, grandkids didn't seem like a far-off dream anymore. But every so often, when James would leave for another sudden business trip or come home late from the gym, a small voice in the back of my head whispered doubts. I pushed them away, telling myself it was all normal, just part of life's routine adjustments. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling entirely. Watching him pack for another trip, I'd find myself asking, "Everything okay at work?" "Same as ever, just the grind," James would answer, and though his words were reassuring, his eyes didn't quite meet mine like they used to. I started watching the clock, noting when he left and when he got back. The intervals were stretching longer, the explanations shorter. "Just ran into some traffic," or "had to help a colleague out," became common refrains. One night, lying in bed waiting for him to come home, I realized that no matter how perfect things seemed, there was a crack somewhere. I just hoped it was my imagination running wild, a silly phase that would pass. Because the alternative, the possibility that something serious was amiss, was something I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. It was a regular Thursday at the salon when Marie, a client I've known for years, came in bubbling with excitement about her recent vacation. As she settled into the chair, she started showing me videos they'd taken. "We caught so much of the trip, Ella, look at this one," she beamed, scrolling through her phone. As she held up the screen, a video of a bustling restaurant played. I watched, half listening as Marie narrated their dining experience, but my attention snapped fully when the camera unintentionally captured a couple at the next table in a deep kiss. My heart sank, my breath caught in my throat. It was James and Clara, Michael's wife, tangled up in each other, completely lost in the moment. "Can you send that to me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Marie, puzzled by my sudden interest, nodded slowly and forwarded the video to me. "Sure, but are you all right, Ella? You look pale." I forced a smile, shaking my head slightly. "Yeah, just thought I saw someone I knew. Thanks." The rest of the day passed in a blur. My hands moved mechanically, cutting and styling, but my mind was stuck on that video. The image of James and Clara together haunted every moment. I didn't dare call James. Instead, I waited until I was home, my nerves stretched tight, and called Michael. "Michael, I need you to come over. It's important," I said as soon as he picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. When he arrived, his face was etched with concern. "Mom, what's going on? Are you okay?" I didn't meet his eyes as I handed him my phone with the video queued up. "Just watch," I said, my voice breaking. The color drained from Michael's face as he watched. The shock, the realization, hit him all at once. Dad? And Clara?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and pain. He looked from the phone to me, searching for an answer. Before I could reply, the front door swung open and in walked James, Clara beside him, both laughing about something trivial. The sight of them so carefree twisted the knife deeper into my chest. James, still smiling, started, "Guess who I ran into today and gave a ride?" His words hung in the air as he finally noticed the atmosphere. Michael threw the phone on the table, the video still playing, the sound of their laughter grotesquely out of place now. James's smile faltered, his eyes flicking from the phone to our faces, realizing what had happened. Clara's smile dropped as she followed his gaze to the screen displaying their indiscretion. The second that video ended, the air in the room turned icy. James turned pale as if he'd seen a ghost, while Clara, with a cruel smirk, didn't even try to hide her glee. "I love him," she declared, pointing unabashedly at James. "And honestly, Ella, you're old. He doesn't want you anymore." Her words stung like a slap. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. I couldn't believe I had welcomed such a snake into our home, into our family. How had I been so blind? Michael's reaction was instant. His face flushed with anger as he stood up, towering over his father. "I'm done with you, Dad. And you." He turned his fury towards Clara. "Get out of my house." Clara's laugh was sharp, her voice laced with entitlement. "And where am I supposed to go? I'm entitled to half of this apartment and alimony. You owe me that much." Michael scoffed, the sound bitter and full of scorn. "The apartment was mine before we even met. It's in my name only. And as for alimony," he sneered, "your cheating has taken care of that. You get nothing." While Clara fumbled for a response, James stepped in, his voice cold and calculated. "We need to talk about our assets, Ella. We've got 30 years of marriage here. I want half of everything." His audacity was breathtaking. My entire world was crumbling, and he was worried about money. The nerve of him, after what he'd done, to stand there and demand a share of our life together as if he hadn't just betrayed everything we built. The divorce was nasty, drawn out, and every encounter dripped with venom, especially from James. He strutted into court, playing the wronged party, trying to smear my name and grab as much as he could from the ruins of our marriage. It was excruciating to watch the man I had loved twist our memories into lies, just to gain an upper hand. And Clara, oh Clara had the gall to taunt me outside the courtroom on the last day. "You're just an old woman, Ella. James wanted someone young and beautiful, like me." Her words echoed in my ears, each syllable a pointed dagger meant to wound. It felt like the ultimate betrayal, not just of the heart but of all the years we'd spent side by side. I drove home those days feeling like the shell of the woman I used to be, questioning my worth, questioning every year we'd spent together. But through this storm, Michael was my rock. He stood by me, his presence a constant reminder that not everything from my marriage was a loss. Seeing the strength and integrity in my son, I realized that if my marriage had given me nothing else, it had given me him, a man who knew right from wrong, who stood up for what was right even when it was hard. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and made a vow to myself. "Ella, it's time to rebuild, from the ground up." The reflection staring back at me nodded, as if sealing the pact. One of the hardest decisions I had to make was about the house. It was too full of memories, too big for just me. Plus, the settlement required that we sell it and split the proceeds. "Fresh start, Ella," I muttered to myself as I signed the papers at the real estate agent's office. "Trust me, you're making the right move," the agent, a kindly middle-aged man named Roger, assured me. "Something smaller, more manageable, it'll be good for you." He was right. I bought a cozy 2-bedroom apartment closer to the city center, perfect for one. The day I moved in, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. As I unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, there was a sense of creating something new, something wholly mine. The next challenge was work. My career had always been a part of who I was, and I wasn't about to give that up. With the divorce settlement, I had some capital and a fiery drive to not just continue, but to expand. I decided to open my own beauty salon. Finding the right location took time. I walked through countless potential spots, each time envisioning what could be. When I finally found the perfect place, a small but bright space on a busy street, I knew it was the one. "I can see it now," I told Michael, who had come along to give his approval. "Ella's Elegance, right there on the sign." He grinned, his earlier support unwavering. "It's perfect, Mom. You're going to make it into something amazing." The process of opening the salon was grueling. Renovations, permits, supplies, it seemed endless. But with each step completed, I felt a surge of accomplishment. This was mine, my creation, my new beginning. The grand opening was a flurry of excitement. Friends, longtime clients, and even curious passers-by filled the space, their chatter and laughter breathing life into the once empty shop. 3 years have passed since the divorce, and looking back, I barely recognize the woman I was when this all started. My business has flourished, becoming more than I had dared to hope. The community's support has been overwhelming, and in return, I've done my best to give back, to create a space that's welcoming and warm. Michael got married again 2 years after the divorce. He met Lisa at a community event, and they hit it off right away. They've since had twins, a boy and a girl. Seeing him so happy, so fulfilled, it's given me a new kind of joy I didn't know I was missing. As I lock up the salon at night, the last of the sunset casting a warm glow through the front windows, I often pause and reflect. This journey, every up and down, every setback, and every victory, has reshaped me. I'm not the same person I was, and I'm grateful for it. In those moments, surrounded by the hum of dryers and the smell of shampoo, I realized I had found my way out of the darkness. The betrayal that had once threatened to break me had instead built me stronger, fiercer. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from James, my ex-husband. His voice was casual, as if we were old friends catching up, but his words were like a slap in the face. "Ella, I think it's only fair I get half of your beauty salon. It's doing well, and frankly, it was started with my money since I was the main breadwinner for so long." The nerve of him, after everything, to claim a piece of what I had built from scratch with my own money, post-divorce. I was seething, but I kept my cool. "Okay, James, let's meet and talk about it," I said, plotting to turn the tables on him. After hanging up, I called Michael. He was furious when he heard and suggested we dig a little deeper into James's life now. "Mom, let's see what he's really up to," he said, proposing to hire a private investigator. I agreed. It was time to uncover whatever James and that woman he left us for were hiding. We chose to meet in a crowded cafe downtown. I arrived early, spotted them from a distance, James, looking older but trying hard to appear youthful, beside his much younger wife, Clara, who was visibly pregnant. Sitting down, I braced myself for a tiresome charade. James wasted no time. "Ella, thanks for coming. You know, with the baby on the way, Clara wants to start her own salon. We think a share of your business would be a good start for our family's future." Clara looked at me, smirking smugly as if she had already won this battle. I forced a smile, listening to James ramble about the bright future he envisioned for his new family, all the while thinking how deluded he was. Finally, when he paused for breath, I saw my moment. "James, you're living in a fantasy. This business you want so badly? It was built entirely without your money or influence. And as for this child you're so excited about," I paused, my smile fading as I pulled out a series of photos and slid them across the table to him. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. James and Clara leaned in to look at the photos, clear shots of Clara with another man, not just in casual settings but leaving a hotel together. "And there's more," I continued, my voice steady, despite the chaos I was unleashing. "James, remember when you had chicken pox so bad at 38? The doctor said it left you infertile. I didn't have the heart to tell you before, thinking it would crush you." The color drained from James's face. Clara's eyes widened in horror as she turned to him, her hands trembling. "You're lying!" Clara shrieked, her voice breaking. James just sat there, stunned, as reality crashed down around him. He turned to Clara, anger contorting his features. "Is this true? Are you cheating on me?" The cafe around us had gone silent, all eyes glued to our table. Clara started sobbing, her previous arrogance washed away by public humiliation. "James, I can explain," she stammered, but James was already on his feet. "I don't want to hear it. We're done." He was shouting now, causing a scene as his world fell apart. "Get out of my life." I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. "I think this meeting is over," I announced, my voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I want nothing more to do with either of you." As I walked away, the last thing I saw was Clara weeping and James yelling, the staff rushing over to intervene. I stepped out into the sunlight, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. A few days later, I was at the salon, tidying up after a busy day. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see Michael walking in, his face bright with a smile. "Hey, Mom, how's the champion of independence doing today?" he teased, walking over to give me a hug. I laughed, handing him a broom to help me clean up. "Oh, stop it. But I won't lie, it feels good. Really good." "That's what I like to hear," Michael replied, starting to sweep. "So, what's next for you?" I paused, leaning on my broom. "Well, I've been thinking about that a lot. I want to do more than just run the salon. I want to give back somehow." Michael nodded, looking thoughtful. "You've got a lot to offer, Mom. Maybe some kind of mentorship program? You know, for young women starting out?" "That's exactly what I was thinking," I said, excitement bubbling up inside me. "I want to help them build their own futures, make sure they have the support they need." The following weeks flew by as I put our ideas into action. I reached out to local community centers and schools, setting up workshops and talks. The response was overwhelming. So many young women came, eager to learn and grow. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, I sat in my salon, reflecting on everything that had happened. The phone rang, and I answered it, still in a reflective mood. "Ella's Elegance, this is Ella." "Mom, it's me," came Michael's cheerful voice. "Just wanted to check in. How was the workshop today?" "It was fantastic, Michael. These girls, they're so bright and full of potential. It makes me feel like I'm really doing something worthwhile," I replied, a smile spreading across my face. "That's awesome, Mom. I knew you'd be great at this." We chatted a bit more, and after hanging up, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had come so far from the woman who thought her life was over after a divorce. Now, here I was, making a real impact, feeling more fulfilled than I ever had.